Welcome back to the 411 Podcasting Network. I am your host, Larry Csonka, and this is episode 102 of the 411 on Wrestling Podcast. You can follow us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, YouTube, the 411mania.com website, and any major podcasting platform. Please make sure to subscribe to our show, share us around on social media, and if you have time, leave us a 5-star review on the podcasting platform of your choosing. Joining me today is my good friend, Jerome Cusson. Jerome, how are you today, my friend?
I'm still in quarantine, but I think we all are in quarantine, so I think this is just our perpetual state of being, and I like to have nice, positive conversations with my friend Larry Csonka, because podcasting, of course, is something that we do remotely. I don't have to be sitting next to Larry and holding his hand as we podcast together. We can do this from the comfort of our own homes. Unfortunately, we are talking about a topic tonight that may even be as dark, if not darker, than the current goings-on. But I feel like there was some important catharsis that we're also going to get to as well as part of our discussion.
That's right. So we're going to talk about the Vice TV special, The Dark Side of the Ring, on Chris Benoit. And I know it seems weird, but there are actually some people out there that do not know the whole story, and they're getting introduced to this whole thing, which is scary. So I guess just to kind of open up, through June of 2007, I think it's rather safe to say that Chris Benoit was regarded by many as one of the greatest in-ring performers of his generation. And some would even rank him all time. He was highly respected as a wrestler in his career, loved by many, revered and respected by fans and peers alike. But in June of 2007, we learned a harsh lesson that you can follow someone, be a fan of them, and think you know them all you want, only to find out that you really don't.
I think that one of the greatest lessons that you can learn about the people that you admire is that they are human beings, that they are not heroes. I think this is an important lesson that you learn constantly, because it's not just wrestlers, but it's professional athletes. Around the same time, Michael Vick was somebody who was revered as kind of the next generation quarterback. And we learned a lot of very dark things about him with dogfighting, and this was just around the same time as this. And I think it's a lesson that we have to continue to remind ourselves of, that the people that we see on television are flawed human beings, and that they should be treated as such. And you can admire somebody's work, and you can admire what they do in the ring, on the court, in a movie, in a television show, at the theater. But these people are as susceptible to the same flaws that we all are. And of course, and in Chris Benoit's case, I mean, he took things to a particularly dark place. But I think it's always important to have that perspective on individuals, that we really do have to see these people for who they are, and not to put assumptions onto them. Because I think when you do that, when you see wrestlers or athletes in a certain way, not as human beings and above in some cases, I think you can end up being very disappointed. And this is something that I've certainly done in my case with even wrestlers on the independent level, and admiring them and liking the work that they do, and kind of collating that with the kind of people they are, and then being very disappointed by them ultimately, and realizing that they were not the virtuous people or that I would have hoped, and that I would have liked. And there's certainly many instances of that, and Chris Benoit is probably the biggest example, because, as you mentioned, he was definitely one of my favorites. And I knew that in June 2007 that he was kind of winding his career down. But to have something like this happen, to say that it was shocking would be the understatement of the century.
It really was. And to kind of continue on with the story, it's such a wild thing, because again, this was someone, as I said, fans adored, respected, and admired by his peers for his work ethic and overall skill. And one weekend here in June, he misses a couple live events and he misses a pay-per-view. And WWE starts to get worried. They request a welfare check from the Fayetteville, Georgia police because they are worried about Chris because he had communicated with Chavo Guerrero, among others, that Nancy and his son were suffering from food poisoning. And then later on, the dogs are in the enclosed pool area, the back door is unlocked, text came. So what happened was the police show up, and there's more in the documentary, which we'll talk about, but the police show up, they find Chris, Nancy, and Daniel all dead. And the initial feeling coming out of it was that they were murdered. So Raw is that night when they find out. So WWE decides, because Chris Benoit was such a respected individual and a former world champion, that they're going to abandon the Vince McMahon is dead storyline. They're going to put on a Chris Benoit tribute episode of Raw. And this show features some of his greatest matches and accomplishments, moments, superstars sharing their love and thoughts on Chris and Nancy and their son. And what's extra chilling now when you watch the documentary is, through all this love and admiration, is William Regal, who basically says that there is a lot that I would love to say about Chris Benoit, but all I'm going to say right now basically is that he was one of the hardest working people I've ever seen that loved wrestling, and nothing personal, nothing touching, nothing about loving him. And it was really, really kind of felt odd at the time because it felt almost heartless. But then you realize when you learn in the documentary, Chris Jericho tells you that William Regal lived in the same area as Benoit and was privy to more information than everybody else was. Which is why he probably said, I could say a lot about Chris Benoit, but all I will say is this. So it's really chilling now in retrospect when you're watching this documentary. So during the course of the day and during the course of Monday Night Raw, police are investigating, and it is determined that Chris Benoit committed the murders of his wife and child and then committed suicide. And that information slowly started leaking out during Monday Night Raw. And by the end of Monday Night Raw on the East Coast, everybody pretty much knew what happened. And because they really couldn't change anything, or it would have taken, I guess they could have changed it, but it would have taken great effort, WWE aired the same show on the West Coast delay, even though the news was out. And this obviously becomes a giant clusterfuck. The next day, Vince McMahon has to open up ECW TV by apologizing, and basically that's the start of striking Chris Benoit from the WWE record. And it's just, I find it in this instance, because you could judge WWE on a lot of things. I find it hard to be harsh on them for putting on a tribute show, because they were, by all accounts, informed that the family was murdered. Now, granted, you could say they could have changed course during the show, but how do you come on an hour into the show and go, hey, everybody, we're sorry, we found out this guy's an asshole and he killed everybody? So they're in an awfully shitty situation there. But it's just, it's you almost don't know how to react with it. So Dark Side of the Ring returns for the second season. They kick off with a 2-hour special on the Benoit family tragedy. That's what we're going to dig into today. So I guess first of all, Jerome, I know you said you were a Chris Benoit fan. I was as well. Where were you when you found out, and what were your initial thoughts before you knew the full scope of it?
I think where I was is I was just about a month out of graduating college. I had just graduated with my bachelor's degree, and I think I was just kind of hanging around my house and hanging around the outside area because it was during the summer. And I don't know if I received a text message or something but I definitely became aware of what happened, and I wasn't really watching Raw on a regular basis at this point. I was kind of going in and out, but I wasn't watching it on a summer night, and I remember just being very, very surprised and just hanging out online that whole night and just refreshing and reading the Ring of Honor message board was actually a place that I was hanging out digitally. I really wasn't on Twitter at that point, so that's kind of where I was at. And I just remember just things taking a very dark turn as the night went on. And the thing that has always struck me about this story is just the layers that are involved. You've got Chris Benoit, who's one of the most popular kind of underground wrestlers slash kind of IWC, whatever that term means. He's kind of an IWC favorite for a long time. Probably one of the first guys to break out of that and to be one of the more successful wrestlers. And even though he wasn't necessarily quote unquote as big of a draw, he probably had a lot of respect from those kinds of fans. And it was the idea that he did this, the fact that there was a murder involved, and there was also the storyline that you hinted at a little bit, that it was supposed to be Vince McMahon's funeral because he had fake killed himself. And the thing that I remember at the time when all that was going on was that they were kind of playing this game with Vince McMahon, and there were a lot of people that were critiquing how bad a taste it was at that point, because this back in 2007 there was definitely a point when wrestlers were dying at a much faster clip. It doesn't feel like in 2020 and even 2019 that we're getting that as much with wrestlers dying prematurely, but in 2007, I mean, this was something that happened like once or twice a month, in fact. And I remember at the time that Sensational Sherry had died, and people were like, yeah, this is not good, this probably needs to stop. And it didn't, and then this happened, and it really did stop. So I don't know if it's karma, but the fact that the Vince McMahon death storyline was going on while this was going on has always felt like a really weird side note to everything. And then, of course, the layers that come afterward, the fact that the media kind of jumped on this story to attack professional wrestling, and it was one of those things where they were kind of sending in the clowns, and just a lot of people really showed their ass on Fox News and CNN and these different places. And so there was the media response to it, and there was the fact that WWE wiped Chris Benoit from existence, and you also had you had the wellness policy becoming a lot more strict after this. You had the discovery and learning more about CTE. So there's so much to this story, and so much that you're trying to tell in a 2-hour documentary. And I guess the thing that I'm most glad about the documentary is that they really focus a lot of their attention on the story itself and not to the media reaction. I almost feel like you could do a documentary just about the media reaction and how piss poor it was. But I think it's really important to just focus on Chris Benoit's story. And they didn't really reference Vince McMahon and that storyline very much in the documentary. I think that was probably a positive thing. Wasn't Vince McMahon's brother supposed to be making an on-camera appearance?
Yeah, there was a rumor that was going to happen. Yeah, like Rod McMahon was going to come in.
Yeah, I mean, just the weirdest side notes from this whole story.
Yeah, and going back to like where I was, is I remember that night I was working. I worked nights at a Greek restaurant in town, and I remember I actually got off a little early because it was a very slow Monday night, so I got home about 10 to 9, and I start logging on and everything, and Raw comes on, and all this shit just hits the fan, and it's like fucking, I'm floored, right? And you kind of mentioned, like, the early 2000s, like, for some of you guys that may not have been around at the time, let me tell you, the early 2000s were fucking hell as a wrestling columnist for me at times. As Jerome said, it felt like twice a month, if not more, I was writing an article or a tribute or some form of obituary piece on a professional wrestler. And we're not talking about like a lovely old gentleman that died at the age of 75 due to heart complications. We're talking about motherfuckers in their 30s, 40s, early 50s, all dying from complications due to steroids or due to drug issues or overdoses, and it was like such a fucking shitty time. There is no other way to put that. But, yeah, it was just... Because I remember the Eddie death, that happened on a Sunday, and I found out about that. I came home because I worked as a choir director at the time. I come home, I go to lunch after church, I come home, and my email's blowing up, and it's all over the place. You know, Eddie Guerrero's dead. And I mainly want to mention that because hour one of this documentary really focuses on setting the stage of the Eddie Guerrero life, his death, but also his relationship with Chris Benoit. It shows their kind of rise as wrestlers, their deep friendship, to the point that like Chris Benoit was not a religious man, but Eddie Guerrero had given him a Bible, I think it was for Christmas one year, and Chris Benoit actually took it like everywhere with him because Eddie gave it to him. So they dig really deep into this long relationship going back from Japan through ECW, through WCW, and just how tight they were, how much they were basically like brothers because they were so together. And it also dives into a little bit of how close Vicky Guerrero and Nancy Benoit were. To the point that you find out that when Eddie Guerrero passes away, Nancy Benoit basically lives with Vicky Guerrero for a month to keep her functioning and to help her with her kids and everything because she's just destroyed. But not only is Vicky Guerrero destroyed in this whole thing, Chris Benoit was probably destroyed way more than she was because in many ways everybody kind of points back to Eddie's death as what really changed Chris. And it's just scary because they go through all this timeline stuff about Chris Benoit. He breaks down when he finds out about Eddie's death. And then he's showing more emotion to people and in public than he would ever do before. He would break down in front of others. He had a weird string of paranoia to where he was worried about his kid being kidnapped, or he would start taking alternate routes to the gym and taking different cars. I mean, really, really deep paranoia, really mentally fucked up things happening with Chris Benoit. And then Vicky Guerrero starts telling stories about how, Nancy's staying at her house, so, Chris would come to visit on his days off, and the kids would find Chris Benoit crying upstairs in Eddie's gym. Or Vicky would find Chris Benoit in her bed on Eddie's side, cuddling his pillow and just crying into it nonstop. And, I mean, this is a broken man who lost his friend. And then later on we find out that one of his coping mechanisms was he had a journal to where he would write letters to Eddie Guerrero. And I think the most chilling thing out of that was there was a line in one of those letters to Eddie, something along the lines of, "I'll be with you soon." So I think a lot of people might not have understood how deep this relationship was between these two, how good of friends they were, and really how much Eddie's death just wrecked Chris Benoit's psyche and life to a point, Jerome.
Well, I think the impression that you get is that it was as close to a romantic relationship without actually being romantic. At least that is how it came across to me. And I think that what they do a reasonable job of, and I'm going to get to my critiques in a second, but I think they do a really good job of talking about Chris Benoit's kind of relationship to wrestling and just how obsessive he was. When there's a particular moment early on when they talk about him punishing himself when he was doing squats after he missed kind of this random kick on a non-televised event in Japan. And I think that they did that to kind of illustrate just how close he was to the business. And Eddie Guerrero was pretty clearly a part of that relationship because Eddie Guerrero, I think, represented a lot of the same ideals that Chris Benoit had. I think, unfortunately, what the documentary does not do is there are a lot of stories about the way that Chris Benoit treated some of the younger wrestlers in WCW and New Japan and in WWE as well. That they didn't really get into that as much, and I think that is probably my biggest critique because I don't want to say that they portrayed Chris Benoit as a saint, but it felt like that they did not portray a fully accurate picture of who Chris Benoit was within the context of the business. That yes, he was of course a fantastic performer that I think a lot of fans kind of were able to connect to because of his struggles and the fact that he was kind of this underdog, and maybe he wasn't the most charismatic guy, but he was just kind of this very intense, very hardworking dude that people respected. And I do wish that they had talked a little bit about that because I think that just lends further credence to the kind of person who Chris Benoit unfortunately was. And I think that we do have a much better understanding, at least of CTE and kind of the effects that it can have on the brain. But I guess the question that I had as I was watching part one especially is how much did Eddie Guerrero's death exacerbate the CTE? What did it do to his brain? Because it clearly did something. It exacerbated things to a point where he could basically no longer function the final 2 years of his life. And I don't know if there was any substance dependency that also came with this situation. But the thing that I couldn't help but wonder is what did Eddie Guerrero's death do to Chris Benoit's brain to the point where he couldn't function and he did what he did just less than 2 years later?
Yeah, it's... And to jump back, I totally agree with your criticism. I think that you look at that and the obsessive nature and his drive to be great and also being an asshole fully falls into that Dynamite Kid syndrome he had because he wanted to be the Dynamite Kid. And unfortunately, he was in many ways in terms of abusing steroids, in terms of treating other people poorly. The thing I will say is that, I don't know how you fit it in unless you make a third hour because you can't cut out the Eddie stuff. Because it's so important to the story.
Right, I totally agree with that. I don't think you can cut the Eddie stuff.
But I just want to say, though, I do agree with your point to where it's I don't want a third hour to a point, and we'll get into that a little later, but, I think it's a very fair point because, the man was not a saint. Like I said, he had Dynamite Kid syndrome in many ways. Dynamite Kid is one of the greatest light heavyweight wrestlers of all time, but he was a fucking asshole. Everybody will tell you both of those things as a fact. They will tell you he was great, and they will also tell you he was just an asshole. Ribs backstage and getting into fights and stupid shit like that. He was an asshole is what it was. And that's, that was the culture back then, obviously, but still, an asshole's an asshole. And unfortunately, like you said, Benoit fell into a lot of that stuff as well. And, again, it's hard to judge was he just an asshole? Was it a combination of being an asshole and roid rage on top of it? Was it a combination of roid rage, being an asshole, and early onset of CTE? We'll never know fully, but I think it is something that could have been explored, so I will agree with you on that.
And I think that one of the other things that the documentary brings up is just this idea of the flying headbutt. I think that is one of the things that I really appreciated. 1 second, Larry.
Alright, we'll take a little pause while Jerome disappears for a moment. And I'll just vamp. He was talking about the flying headbutt stuff, and they talk about that in the documentary, how Harley Race did the flying headbutt for years and told people not to do it because it wrecked his back and his hips and everything in his neck. Alright, you back?
Yes, I am back. Okay.
I talked a little bit about the Harley Race stuff in the documentary, how they talked about Harley Race warned everybody not to do the headbutt because it wrecked his neck, his back, his hips. And then Dynamite Kid did the headbutt for years, and he ended up with a wheelchair. But people kept doing it.
Yeah, I mean, and unfortunately, I think Daniel Bryan, he used to do it as well. I don't think he's done it in a while, though. Correct?
Every once in a while, he'll do it. It's extremely rare, but I wish he wouldn't at all.
I mean, yeah, I think when Harley Race tells you to not do a move, I mean, it's Harley Race. If this really tough guy tells you not to do something, you probably shouldn't do it. And it's unfortunate that neither Dynamite Kid nor Chris Benoit took his advice. But I do hope that all wrestlers at this point understand not to do that move and to just stop it. But I did think that was an important part of the documentary that could have been left on the cutting room floor, and I appreciate that they left it in because I think it contributes to the narrative of Chris Benoit's the issues that he was going through and the fact that he was ultimately diagnosed with CTE and undoubtedly had a lot of physical problems that were probably exacerbated by steroid use and all these things.
And you have to also keep into consideration, Chris Benoit had that neck fusion surgery. And he
completely forgot about that until you just reminded me.
So, and like when he was out for the neck fusion stuff, he was still taking steroids because he wanted to recover, and also because he had almost an addiction to the fact that he didn't want to look bad physically because he kept feeling that he had to look big. And they mentioned that was a big point of contention, that Nancy was very upset about that. But the other thing is, when Chris Benoit comes back, he keeps doing the fucking headbutt after having neck surgery. And there's a lot of allegations out there that he had a pain medication dependency because of that, addiction, whatever you want to call it, because he kept doing it and he kept working essentially the same style. Which, when you take everything else and you mix it all together, that's just a horrible recipe, all things considered. But like I said, Hour 1 really dives into that relationship with Eddie Guerrero and how it damaged Chris Benoit. And just kind of anything else on Hour 1, because that's like the big bulk of Hour 1, Jerome.
I think we do have to talk about the Nancy stuff, because I think that's the other thing that this documentary seems very determined to do, is to redeem Nancy and kind of give her legacy back, because her name has unfortunately also kind of been banned by WWE television. And the thing that I really appreciated about the first hour is that they really did talk about Nancy and the fact that she was a part of pro wrestling, and that she just was not the victim. She just wasn't Chris Benoit's wife. That she was this person who was involved in the business. She may have been abused by her previous boyfriends, one of which was Kevin Sullivan. I think it's been mentioned on shoot interviews, but it was surprising to me. I'd never heard these allegations of physical abuse, but they go out of their way to talk about it, and they for legal reasons, they obviously did talk to Kevin Sullivan, and he denied the claims. But I mean, I think that is something that does have to be pointed out, that Nancy is not just somebody who was killed. She was somebody who was heavily involved in wrestling, and to just wipe her legacy away is really unfair to me. And I don't think that I had really put that together. But in watching this, it really made it clear to me that something needs to be done. I don't know whether it's putting her into the Hall of Fame or something, but to relegate her to victim, I think is really unfair.
Yeah, and that's a great point. They do a very nice job of kind of telling the story of her career, how she got into wrestling and how influential she was. And I think near the end of Hour 2, Jericho sums it up the best when they're talking about how, Nancy was great at her job. She did a job that isn't really done well or by almost anyone anymore. And he's like, in my opinion, she's a Hall of Famer. He goes, but how do you put her in? He's like, here's Nancy Benoit. He goes, well, we can't say that name. He's like, because the association's always there. And that is obviously on a smaller scale, because the murders are the main thing. But one of the other tragedies coming out of this is the fact that her legacy is largely forgotten. A lot of people only know her as Chris Benoit's wife. They don't understand the early stuff with Kevin Sullivan, her work with Woman in ECW and WCW, just a lot of the really good work she did. Unfortunately, she's Chris's wife that was abused and later killed. And that's kind of her legacy for the worse. But as you said, they did a very good job of trying to change that narrative. And I think that's very appreciated because I didn't know if they would try to dive into that very much because I figured this would just really kind of get into Chris's career, the injury, possibly the behind-the-scenes asshole nature we had heard about and discussed earlier. But again, they went in a little bit of a different direction. You got a lot about Eddie, that relationship. You got a lot of background about Nancy. And, yeah, I think they did a lot of good work there. And hopefully one day she can be just more recognized for her work or honored in some way down the line. I highly doubt it'll ever be by WWE. If anything, it'll be one of those legacy wing things to where there's no actual induction and they'll list off 20 names and you'll see Woman, and that'll be it. But
they could always go with her maiden name, couldn't they?
They could. But a lot of the time, anyway, like when they put Kevin Nash in the Hall of Fame, they put him in as Diesel. So I could see her like getting a mention as Woman, because that was her most high profile work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's probably what they would have to do in that situation.
And it's a shame that because like Jericho said, he's like you can't call her Nancy Benoit because that name is just stricken from the WWE record.
Yeah, and I kind of understand why.
Yeah, because you automatically go back to this time and everything negative that happened, and then WWE is still obviously bitter about the media coverage around that time and how a bunch of their stupid talking heads got exposed also during that time. But
well, in WWE, the big problem with WWE is they can't handle the real world. I mean, you can see that even by the way they handle their television now. The fact that they don't even mention COVID-19 or what's actually happening. Vince McMahon cannot deal with the real world in any tangible way, and that has been true since he bought the company back in 1983. If you look at the numerous examples in the way that he's responded to various international conflicts with WrestleMania 7, you look at the way that he responded to 9/11 with that SmackDown episode, with the Chris Benoit stuff. I mean, it's just his product cannot handle the real world, and anytime the real world comes and affects his company, I mean, it's pretty dire.
It really is. Before we kind of move on, anything else in like hour one that you really want to dig into or share or criticize or praise, whatever?
No, I mean, it's remarkable to me that moment at WrestleMania 20 with Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit holding their respective titles, it felt like that was going to be a moment that would live forever. And it just feels like it never even happened because of Chris Benoit especially, and it feels weird that the last WrestleMania to take place in Madison Square Garden, the last moment of that show basically doesn't exist.
Yeah, because that was, for guys like us, Jerome, that was like a big moment because it was like our guys finally did it. The smaller, underappreciated, the Kevin Nash, Vanilla Spot monkeys that'll never make it, they made it on the big stage, on WWE's biggest stage, and the celebration of Eddie and Chris at the end of WrestleMania 20 was, for years, for me, one of the best moments in wrestling.
And I would like to point out that Chris Benoit, I'm not doing this to praise Benoit, but that was at the end of a 5-hour WrestleMania, and you know what that Madison Square Garden crowd was not at the end of that show? Burned out.
This is true.
But yeah, that's all I've got for hour one. I think hour two is very different than hour one.
Yeah, so hour two, things shift dramatically. We start getting into the official murder-suicide. including comments from local police, the request for the wellness check, the WWE putting on the tribute show, which they later basically take back the next day, and that starts the erasure of Chris Benoit from history. And not only that, that leads into the vicious news cycle that Jerome brought up earlier. And Nancy's sister Sandra and David, right? I keep makes it want to flip David and Daniel. It's David.
Yes,
right? Okay.
It is.
Thank
David.
you. I keep wanting to flip it, and I tried to take a bunch of notes, but they talk about how the news cycle was not just hell in terms of how it was covering, but hell for them because media was constantly outside their homes, was constantly trying to talk to them. David was getting shit at school, and it's a fucking shit show of epic proportions for WWE as a company, as they're trying to distance themselves, as they're trying to defend themselves. And then it's just hell for the family because, first of all, you can't live a normal life because, you're depending on who it is, your mom, sister, aunt, cousin has been killed, and your father is dead, and, your little brother, and all this shit, and then you have to come to the terms of the fact that, if you're David, you have to come to terms with the fact that your dad did it. And I watch Hour 2, and I constantly feel bad for David Benoit. Because this is a kid that idolized his father in every way. He does interviews to this day talking about how he wanted to wrestle, he wants to wrestle, he wanted to be like his father. And that's kind of all he wanted with life. And not only did he want to be like his father, he scarily looks like his father, so there's a constant reminder. And all I could think of watching this is like, the ending, and we'll talk about the little reunion at the ending, but all I could think of is, get the fuck away from the professional wrestling business. Do not get involved. Go away. Just don't even get in it, please.
Yeah, it is shocking to me just how many of these wrestlers' sons, after their fathers or family members have died prematurely, like the fact that Davey Boy Smith Jr. is in wrestling is absolutely mind-boggling to me. Not just for his father, but what happened to his uncle, and just what has happened to that family. It is amazing to me. I feel the same way about Pillman Jr. Like, why are these? I can't deal with it. It's really, really hard for me to see how some of these folks can be involved after what wrestling has done to some of their family members. It's just really something that's hard to justify, and I sincerely hope that David is not ever involved in wrestling in any conceivable way, because I don't think people are ever going to be able to accept, whether this is fair or not, the fact that he looks so much like his father. And it's the way that he looks like his father is in his eyes. That's specifically what it is. It's not really his nose, it's not really his face, but it's his eyes. Just very, almost exactly the same color, the same shape. That's where I think people get lost and see that connection. And for that reason, I don't think that people would ever fully accept him being involved in wrestling. It would be the same thing as if O.J. Simpson had a son and that son looked exactly like him. His son would never have been able to play football because of what his father did. And I think it's the same principle. I don't think he will have a very hard time living his life, and that sucks. But especially with wrestling, I am hopeful that the right people are in his ear and are just telling him to stay away for a lot of reasons. But the reunion was a huge positive. It was interesting to me that the author of Ring of Hell, Matthew Randazzo, was interested, and I was very curious to know what your thoughts were on kind of that book and the fact that he was involved in this documentary.
I never got to read the book. I know it's I know a lot of people thought it was really good, and then I know a lot of people thought it was like a total TMZ trash piece. So I guess I don't know, because I can't give it a fair assessment because I didn't read it. I know that David and Sandra really didn't want him involved in the show, from what I've heard. But, I mean, I think that, you're telling the story, and you kind of got to cover all sides, and whether or not he might have covered it in the most tactful way possible. And again, I can't judge because I didn't read it, but he did write what many people consider like the definitive book on it. So his inclusion, I think, made sense, and I don't necessarily think he spoke out of school in terms of anything. I think he just kind of tried to tell the story from the story he was trying to tell.
Yeah, I think you needed someone to just the facts, and I think that's what he did in part 2, is to literally just run down what happened that weekend in an almost clinical way, because I think it would be really hard to just cover that entire weekend through narration or through something else. And there's a lot that happened that weekend, and I think it's important to cover all of it in as objective a way as possible. So I think that his purpose, for that reason, I think it was served. And I think just the way that everything went down, and you get into some of the conversations about the funeral and the fact that Jim Ross wasn't welcomed at the funeral, and the fact that WWE not only wiped Chris Benoit's name from existence, but also offered no help to any of the family members. I mean, I think that kind of speaks to WWE's character and the way that they treat these things, that again, when the real world comes calling, that they just want to sweep it under the rug as quickly as possible and pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah, you bring up the Jim Ross thing, and Jim Ross is included in this documentary, and he went to the funeral, and he was basically the lone WWE corporate representative, and Nancy's sister wanted no fucking part of this. Sandra explains in the documentary she felt that she thought that Jim Ross being there essentially was bullshit and a work. And she talks about how no one reached out to her. David talks about that. They said the only people that reached out to them were Chris Jericho and Chavo Guerrero. Repeatedly. And that kind of goes into... We talked about the Raw special and how people were telling stories of Chris Benoit or praising Chris Benoit or sharing their love. And one of the more like kind of heart-wrenching things during this was listening to Chavo, because this poor son of a bitch, and I'm not like a big Chavo fan by any means, but this dude during that special talked about how he loved Chris, how he was like a brother, how I would trust my children with him. And then Chavo's talking in this documentary, he's like, all this shit comes out and I have to live with the fact that I humanized a murderer on national TV. And he's like, and it took him a long time to get over that. And again, I mean, he didn't know, but it's one of those things after the fact that, he said all these glowing things about him and I trust my kids with him, and then you found out he killed his son and wife. And I don't know how he didn't fucking go insane after that. And obviously, Vicky Guerrero was, I guess the best way to put it, she was angry. She talks about that, like, she understood if Chris was having problems and had to kill himself, she would have been fine with that. But to take Nancy and Daniel with him was the thing that she could not forgive, and that's why she didn't go to the funeral.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand her perspective on that. I mean, I was never comfortable with Vicky Guerrero being on WWE TV as a heel. I know that there are a lot of people who have praised her over the years, and I certainly see where those folks are coming from, but it always just felt gross to me that here was this widow who was mourning her husband, and they basically turned her into a comedy act and used her for very cheap heel heat, and they would involve her in romantic dances with Dolph Ziggler and Edge and people like that. And I was never, it just something was that really always bothered me and I was never comfortable with. And I don't know. I think that just watching her, I think I'm even more convinced that it's never been right, because she's clearly gone through a lot. And I understand that anger towards Chris Benoit because of what he did and the cowardice involved to murder his family and then to kill himself. I mean, that is a cowardly act. I mean, I'm not somebody who says that committing suicide by itself is a cowardly act, because there's a lot of reasons that it happens. But I think in this specific instance, I certainly see where she's coming from. And you look at what Chavo and all that he's gone through with his family, and having his uncle die in his arms, and the fact that he's been wrestling for such a long time. And I mean, I hope he's gone through therapy, because that is the only way that somebody could possibly get through the things that he's had to deal with over the course of his life. Because, I know he's also gone through injuries, and he's been a part of a bunch of different companies and whatnot. And I think he's also somebody that is kind of looked down upon by some fans for the way that he acts and the way he wrestles and the way he behaves in certain companies. But I mean, it's really obvious that regardless of what you think of Vicky and Chavo, that those are two folks who have been through a lot. And that's one of the things that really comes across, is just the humanity of those two people.
Yeah, I hope Chavo goes to all the fucking therapy, honestly, just to keep that man sane. Because, again, there's so much to deal with between his own family and other tragedies in the business, and it's just, it has to take a toll on you. And some of the other stuff they dove into a lot was, and we talked about the steroid abuse of Chris Benoit. And, there were people for years that would try to downplay that, but, my man blew up. He got gigantic, way bigger than his frame could really hold. And they talk about how Nancy was very upset with him at times for continuing to use. She was very upset with the wellness policy. And, WWE throughout this whole thing, when it goes on after Chris's death, they constantly defend themselves. He wasn't on steroids. We drug test, blah, 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 blah. And then, we find out that, when he dies, he has 10 times the testosterone in his body than a normal person would have. Now, granted, he was on a TUA exception, but at the most he should have had 3 to 4. So the fact that it was 10 is fucking ridiculous. And then it did come out that he actually failed a bunch of WWE drug tests and they never punished him for it. So that's a real great look, and then you have guys like Fit Finlay and Mr. Anderson, Ken Anderson, on fucking TV with Nancy Grace defending the WWE, and oh no, these tests are strict, and if you take the wrong thing you get popped, and blah 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 blah. And then all this stuff comes out about Chris Benoit, and of course WWE is going to continue to not only distance and erase the dude, they're just getting the fuck out of Dodge. I mean, it was to the point that when their doctor and Jerry McDevitt would go on talk shows, that they would do their portion of the talk show, and then if there was anyone that would have a counter argument, like Dave Meltzer or whoever else it might happen to be, their segment would come next, but the WWE people would leave so that they couldn't counterpoint back and forth. They would go in there and drop their propaganda, we drug test, everybody's okay, and they would get the fuck out.
Yeah, I mean, that seems again, that is very typical of their MO, and it is not surprising the way that they have responded, and the fact that they haven't even addressed the documentary in any conceivable way. And I mean, I think it says a lot that they wouldn't even be put in a position to have to answer questions about the documentary. I think says a lot about where they're at right now, because they have these sweetheart deals with Fox and ESPN and all these different places, so they're not going to get interrogated because of all the live programming that they're producing for these places right now. And I do think that their feet should be held more to the fire about this time period and what they've done since. I mean, allegedly things are better, And I certainly think that if you watch WWE television, there are very few times where I'm like, well, that guy's on steroids. I mean, I'm sure that the quality of the drugs has gotten exponentially better as we've gotten into human growth hormones. So there's no doubt that people are still using, but it certainly does not feel as egregious as it used to be.
I think that's fair, and I do want to say that on one hand, I do think the WWE wellness policy is a bunch of bullshit, and the fact that they randomly punish people when they feel they need to. Like this year, we had a couple random suspensions out of nowhere. Robert Roode, Andrade, Samoa Joe, and shit like that. And it's like weird because we went for like seemingly forever without anything, and then we get some random suspensions. But I will say that the wellness policy has done a lot of good in the fact that you do not have guys rushing back after a concussion now. Concussion protocol is much better. MVP will admit that WWE saved his life when they found he had a heart issue years ago, and they pulled him off the road for like 9 months until he was better and got him treated. So changes have been made in positives. I don't think that it's a glowing example of a wellness policy everybody should follow, because I think there is a large amount of bullshit to it. But I do think in terms of monitoring basic health, heart conditions, concussion protocol, and stuff like that, and probably downplaying a lot of the drug use, it has helped. It's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. And as Jerome just mentioned, it's 2020. The level of drug design has got exponentially better, and I'm sure there's all kind of fancy shit out there that won't be detected for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if since we're all cooped up, now's a great time to go to Netflix, and there is a fantastic documentary called Screwball that is about steroids in baseball, specifically the Alex Rodriguez case. It is fantastic, and I think it kind of gives you an idea of the kind of drugs that I was just referring to. And it, you know how Dark Side of the Ring has reenactments?
Mm-hmm.
The Screwball has reenactments, and they have kids playing the various people on it. So like Alex Rodriguez is portrayed by a child. So that is yet another reason to watch that documentary.
Fantastic. I might have to look at that. I have some free time.
So yeah, I think as far as kind of this, I can't believe they found a happy ending to this documentary. I think that might be the most surprising fact of all, the fact that they had Sandra, Nancy's sister, and David reuniting at, it looked like it was AEW's All-In event from last year. That's what I'm assuming it was. And I think the fact that they found a way to end things in a somewhat happy fashion is a good thing. I mean, I think the fact that these two people have gone through so much, and they are really the only ones that really truly understand what happened and feel kind of those same conflicting emotions. I think it's a good thing that they were brought back together. And Chris Jericho, who is certainly, when it comes to being a quality human being, I think we could say it's a mixed bag for Chris Jericho at best, given some of his recent podcasts. But I think in this specific instance, I think bringing these two people together was the best for everybody involved.
Yeah, and that is like kind of the one really happy thing. And real quick before we close, like another thing, we talked about the Nancy stuff and how Chris was talking about kind of her legacy. He talks about the legacies of Eddie and Chris and how different they are now because of the ways they passed. And Eddie is still looked at as a loved figure. And he passed away due to cumulative abuse of drugs and steroids and everything like that. But he's still looked at as kind of a hero, especially by a lot of young Latino wrestlers. And just as he's looked at as an all-time great because he just passed away. And it was looked at as very unfortunate. To whereas Chris Benoit was somebody who, in Jericho's words, came close to destroying the business that he loved. And he's been erased from the WWE history. And there's just, there's people that can't go back and watch anything Benoit related. They're just, they can't do it. And I get that. And I guess before we just kind of get like a broad strokes closing thoughts on the overall special, Jerome, What is your stance on the Chris Benoit stuff? Can you go back and watch it? Do you want to go back and watch anything? I mean, I don't know. I don't know how to phrase it, but I'm just curious.
No, I mean, I think the answer is pretty definitively no, because it's, in retrospect, you just know that everything that he's doing is slowly building up to the moment when he snapped, figuratively and literally. So it's almost impossible for me to watch anything Chris Benoit related, because you understand the context and everything that has gone on. So, and I almost feel like my stance has hardened over the last few years. I think I was able to do it actually easier like a year or two after, but now it's gotten to a point where I don't know, I just feel really hyper aware of just everything in general, more about what's going on in the world, and just the idea of sitting down and watching somebody who murdered his family. I mean, it's really horrifying to me. And if people can do that, then I get it, separating the art from the artist, but it's not something that I can ever see myself doing. And it's just one of those things. I mean, there are certain wrestlers even who are still working that, based on the things that I know and the things that I think I know, I can't watch their work either. It's really hard. My moral compass, I guess I have too much of a Jiminy Cricket in me, too much of a conscience going on right now. But with Chris Benoit specifically, it's something that I can't do. But if other people could do it, like I would never criticize somebody else. I mean, of course, there's some people who, they do retro reviews for part of their job, and I get it, but it's not something that I would do.
Yeah, and again, you're definitely not the only one. I know a ton of people like that. When it comes to me, I don't sit there and pop on the WWE Network and I need to go watch this Chris Benoit match. I mean, that never enters my mind. Like, I think of 100 wrestlers. Like the other day, I was like, I wanted to watch some Barry Windham, but Chris Benoit never pops into my mind. Now, Steve and I recently did a WrestleMania 17 retro review. And there's a Chris Benoit match on the card, obviously. And we talked about it. And, I was okay with doing it as part of my job. But again, I'm not going to sit there. I did 2-hour Barry Windham binge the other day. I'm never going to do that and sit down and watch Chris Benoit like that. Because, as you said, all I'm going to think of most of the time is what happened. And if it's, like I said, if it's a retro review style situation, or I'm doing if I was doing a big thing on the history of Best of Super Juniors, where I would have to discuss Chris Benoit, I could do that. But I'm not going to sit there out of just, hey, let's watch some professional grappling, and I like that Chris Benoit fella, let's fire it up. That's just not going to happen. I can't do it, and part of that is all I think of is what happened, and the fact that I'm a husband with a wife and kids, and I can't even comprehend how. Again, I can't get into his mindset. We don't know. Obviously his brain was fucked up. He abused steroids. He might have been on other things. He was drinking at the end. I don't know, man, but I can't imagine it getting to that, It just kind of mind fucks me. And I'll tell you what, dude, I watched this shit Tuesday night, and the worst part is I had already watched hour 1, and I got halfway through hour 2. My DVR recording fucking corrupted and blacked out and had none of the rest of the second half. So I had to wait for the replay to come back on, and then I had to watch the entire second hour again.
Lord. Yeah, I watched it through I watched part 2 through the Vice app. So thankfully I did not have to watch this twice, because I cannot imagine myself going back and watching this one again. This is not a lark. This is not something that was easy to watch, but I think it is an important lesson in wrestling history that you will not learn from the WWE. But I think it's really important to be mindful of this situation and to not forget about it, because there are things that wrestlers can take away. I mean, what wrestlers do to their bodies is going to have long-term effects, and you do have to take care of yourself. And I'm not talking about the steroids and the drug part of it. I'm talking about the moves that you're doing in the ring. Depending what you're doing, you could create long-term damage if you're doing a top rope headbutt or whatever dangerous moves these guys are doing. I think it's really important to be mindful, because you want to live until you're 75, 80 years old. You don't want to be dead at the age of 40, and people are wondering what if, or people can't go back and watch your matches anymore because of what you did. You want to live a nice, long, healthy life as much as possible. And the fact that Chris Benoit is somebody who may be one of the greatest in-ring performers of all time, but that will never be remembered. I mean, that is his legacy now. He was one of the best wrestlers ever, and he will never, ever get talked about in a positive way because of the decisions that he made the last weekend, and that is totally deserved.
Yeah, and it's just that's kind of the way it has to be. And I know there are some people that can totally separate and can totally appreciate and go watch back. And I mean, if that's your bag, man, go ahead. You know, I just, if you can do it, that's fine. But I guess overall, just kind of closing up on this documentary. First of all, the documentary did the best ratings on the Vice channel and for this series of all time, over 300,000 viewers. A lot of interest, obviously, going into it. And the first thing I want to say is this is a fucking emotionally draining watch. I mean, if you lived through it, if you were fans of Eddie and Chris, and then you relive that kind of whole relationship and Eddie's death, and then what happened with Chris and Nancy and his son, it's just, it fucking takes it out of you. And then you hear, like, their best friends talking about it, and Nancy's sister talking about it, and Chris's son talking about it, and it's the special, I guess, one of the best ways I can put it is, it's as heartbreaking as it was a fantastically told story. I thought that they let us know that this is a true tragedy. They didn't let anybody off the hook because they hit up WWE pretty hard. It felt really honest. I think they covered almost everything outside of the stuff Jerome brought up earlier. The kind of behind the scenes asshole nature of Chris Benoit. But this did not come off heartless. Because in the end, I thought it came off as a great telling of a horrible and tragic story. And then we did get that really nice moment at the end where, David and Sandra have reunited and they talk now and things seem good for them and they're trying to... And they even asked Sandra at the end, do you think you could ever forgive Chris? And she goes, I'd like to think so, basically. And she goes, I don't know if I will. She's like, it could happen tomorrow, it could happen a year from now, or maybe never, but I'd like to think I can. And that's just... like I said, it's an emotionally draining, heartbreaking watch, and if you're not ready for that, don't watch it. Because you need to be fully fucking prepared.
Yeah, I would agree with you on all accounts. And, I know that I pretty much just echo everything you said, and I think this is by far their best episode. I don't know if the fact that it went 90 minutes instead of just doing everything in 45, but I think this was by far their best episodes. I think it's significantly better than anything in season 1. I think season 1 was a mixed bag. I think a couple of the episodes were very effective, but it didn't feel like there were enough voices in even the good ones, and it felt like a lot of different angles were covered here in a good way. And I am hopeful that this is a representation of what is to come with some of the other topics. Of course, the other topics are not going to be nearly as heavy. I mean, the Dino Bravo thing just feels like a light jaunt now, even though somebody was also killed in that instance as well. But a guy getting killed over a carton of cigarettes just can't hold a candle to this story.
It really can't, yeah, and that's the thing, the Dino Bravo thing seems really serious on the surface, and then you get done watching this, and it's yeah, I'll be okay with that one. I can sit through that, but I mean, again, it's if you're ready for it, it's a highly recommended watch. It's extremely well done, as Jerome said, and I do agree. I think it's the best thing they've done. I think the only thing that maybe, like, not even comes close, but I think if you're looking for a distant second, I think the Von Erich one was very well done. But, I mean, this one just felt like it was on another level, and I think a lot of that was because I know, like, Chris and Vicky and Chavo were heavily involved, and as Jerome mentioned, they kind of hit the story from a lot of angles. Like, you had Jim Ross on there. I think the best thing about Jim Ross was that he wasn't defending WWE, he was trying to explain what WWE was doing from a corporate mindset at the time, because that's what he was. He never says, like, you know, forgive us. But, like, when he talks about the TV show, he's like, we thought we were doing the right thing based off the information that we had. He goes, and we were fucking wrong, basically, you know? So it's like, and then, like, yeah, but he knows. He knows that it was a fucking shit show. But yeah, it's extremely well done. But, yeah, I mean, you better, I mean, I don't know if you need tissues, but you may want to have a drink alongside you for it, because it's going to fucking take it out of you.
Certainly that is the case, and I definitely hope we can talk more about some of the future Dark Side of the Rings as well, because I think there's a lot of meat on some of these bones, and I know the Owen Hart one I believe the Owen Hart one is also going to be just the 45 minutes, but that's going to be a hard one too.
Yeah, I agree. So we talked about the horrible stuff, and Jerome, I know you wanted to talk about something else today, maybe to lighten the mood a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Steve Austin, the Broken Skull session with Bret Hart. These are probably two of my favorite wrestlers, and they've not killed anyone that I know of. So I still think it's generally more acceptable to talk about them in a positive light. And you can really see just in their conversations, just the level of respect that they have for each other, the level of respect that they have for their work, and. This is a nice palate cleanser if you watch the Chris Benoit documentary. And is this part of the free WWE Network stuff that they're doing now?
I'm not 100% sure, but I mean, if it is, you should definitely watch it.
Yeah, I just think that these two guys, it's a real shame that neither one of these guys are agents for WWE. Maybe the way that they see wrestling is why they're not. But I'll tell you what, I mean, these two guys, the level of pride that they take in the work, you could just see it from both of them. Even though they're both very different, the way that they see wrestling is very similar. And you can see why they had 2 5-star matches in 1996 and then at Survivor Series and then WrestleMania 13. I mean, you can see why. You could just see it in the way that they talk to each other, the way they talk about the matches, the way they see it, and the way they visualize it, and the kind of realism that they both wanted to bring. I mean, it's really easy to see why these two guys were as good as they were. In Bret Hart's case, for as long as he were. And I know there's this misconception out there that Bret Hart is boring, and I just want to say that anybody who thinks Bret Hart is boring is, I don't want to say a bad fan, but I think they're misinformed, because I think Bret Hart is great, and I think I think the way that he wrestles his matches, I think, was always very realistic. And I think he elevated so many guys. I mean, my goodness, if you go back and you watch some of his stuff and you look at the quality of the guys that he was working with, I mean, it is embarrassing to some of the people that he was trying to get good matches out of and some of the people that he was trying to get over. And then you get to a point where if he was around now and just the quality of wrestlers that he would be able to have matches with, I mean, it's just kind of an embarrassment of riches as we go now. But, Bret Hart is certainly somebody who I consider to be probably my favorite wrestler. Steve Austin is great as well. And just the way they talk about wrestling is not something that you really hear or see a lot of. And it made me wish that these two guys were agenting Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa matches instead of Shawn Michaels.
Fair point. Yeah. Obviously I love Bret, or I love Steve. I love Bret Hart, and just the chemistry these guys had was great. The Mania 13 match is like one of the best pieces of business ever done at a WrestleMania. Love that match. Everything works in that match, and it's funny because they talk about that match, and the best part is them like breaking down this match on this special. That's the kind of shit I want more of from guys like this. I would love to see them, like, talk about even other matches and, like, break it down, because as you talked about, just their minds for the business, their mindset and how they worked and how they look at work and how they look at crafting a story. It's just, it's fascinating. It's awesome. And I really enjoyed it. And, like, what's cool is, like, they talk about how like, Bret really wanted Austin to be brought in when he was with ECW, and then, you know, he saw him working with Shawn at a house show and how he really wanted to work with him. And then, you talk about, like, you know, Bret Hart made so many fucking lugs look good. I mean, and Christ, you can go back to the Tom McGee thing. Everybody thought that Tom McGee was going to be the next big fucking thing, and nobody realized that the next world champion was sitting right there, and it was going to be Bret Hart. And it's just a testament to how good Bret was. And yeah, it's like this. I will say the one thing about this special is I think it starts just a little slow because, unfortunately, because it's a WWE production and it's Bret Hart, they have to relive Montreal. And I really...
If we never talked about Montreal ever again, I would be very happy, because I don't need to relive it anymore. Documentaries, interviews, just stop it, please.
Exactly. And no, don't get me wrong. Obviously, it's, you know, it's very interesting listening to Bret talk and share his side of the story and stuff. But Jesus Christ, it's how many fucking years later? It's 23 years later. I've heard the story 8 million times. I've heard Bret's version, I've heard Vince's version, I've heard Foley's version, I've heard Triple H's version, I've heard Meltzer's version, I've heard Bruce Pritchard's bullshit version, I've heard fucking everything. I don't need to hear it anymore.
We've heard Shawn Michaels' 3 versions.
At least 3 versions. We've heard Earl Hebner's fucking story. I'm done with it. I don't ever want to see a quote-unquote Montreal Screwjob finish again. I don't want to hear about it. But again, I will say the story is told well. But yeah, when they get into the meat of talking about their wrestling together, how they view wrestling, how they crafted their matches, how they crafted the feuds, that is the money of this special. I mean, it's an enjoyable watch overall, even with the Montreal stuff, which I can do without. But just like when they kind of dig into that stuff, that's just my wheelhouse. I can listen to that shit all day.
Yeah, and if you are still jonesing for some Bret Hart stories, I mean, his book, I think his book is probably the best that I've read, even more so than the Mick Foley ones. I feel like the Mick Foley, I think the first one, I think people were just happy that a wrestler could write a book by himself, and I think it's still very good. But I think the Bret Hart book is probably the best one that I've ever read, because of the quality of the writing and the level of detail that is in it is just so much better than almost anybody else's book that I've ever read. And it's really obvious that Bret put the same amount of work into his book as he did his career. So I would strongly recommend that if you've never read his book to go and purchase that on your local Amazons or whatever, because it's really, really good. And yeah, I think it's just really interesting to hear these two guys talk, and I would love to see them. I would love to see them come together and analyze other matches in the same way that they analyzed their own, because I think it would be really fascinating. And there's some people that could probably learn some things as well about wrestling in a realistic way, and maybe not having 45-minute main events.
Yeah, and that's you know, oh god, I remember the last takeover. People were all upset with me because I did not think that the Ciampa Cole match was this fucking all-time epic match. And I think part of it is they were working into the forced epic narrative, and then like the worst criminal offense to me was, I'm not a big selling Nazi, but if you're going to focus the early portion of this work on Tommaso Ciampa's surgically repaired neck, and then Adam Cole hits a Panama Sunrise on the floor, and then they roll back in and Ciampa starts running through his whole fucking offensive set,
oh my God,
within like 6 seconds, you lose me. Because you were crafting a really great story based in reality. Adam Cole's an asshole. Tommaso Ciampa has a surgically repaired neck. The asshole was attacking that neck. He hit a fucking flippy pile driver on the floor. And 6 seconds later, you're in the ring and Tommaso Ciampa's hitting all this shit. That's where you lose me. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I've joked about that, the HBK Triple H epic formula that gets a little overblown at times, and sometimes it has been spectacular, but this was one of those times where they lost me. And again, I thought it was really good overall, but it just wasn't a fucking classic, and not every match is going to be a classic. Sorry to say.
That WrestleMania 13 match went 23 minutes. I think that is the perfect amount of time for a main event. 23 to 25 minutes. Get your shit in, get the fuck out, and move on with your lives. I think when it just feels like every company now just is trying to force feed these 30, 35 minute, 40 minute, and this is an across the board complaint. I'm not calling any one company out. It just feels like they all do this, and I don't know, man. Like sometimes you could just have a 20-minute main event and it's fine. You could tell your story and have just as good of a time, if not better, in 20 minutes as opposed to 40 minutes.
Dude, I've been talking about that as well. Like, I love me some New Japan. I love my New Japan. But, like, I don't think every Okada title defense needs to be 35 minutes. I think sometimes when you're in that, when you have, like, a challenger of the month person, like, I've seen Okada work fucking 12-minute 4-star matches in the G1. Why can't you just go out there and have a surprise 12-minute main event where he ends up just kind of wrecking a fool? And you can still have a great match. It doesn't have to be 35 fucking minutes. And yeah, that's the worst thing is like it's spilled into everywhere. The indie companies do it and everybody else starts to do it. And yeah, I don't need everybody trying to do a 30, 40 minute fucking epic main event, because my opinion is when you try to force the epic, that's when you absolutely fail to deliver on it. It's the best example of this is the Triple H WrestleMania formula over his past few years, and it's just like it doesn't work. It's overproduced. It goes too long. It loses the plot, and I can't deal with it. But yeah, I mean, dude, I would, if you told me Steve Austin and Bret Hart were going to come together once a month and review fucking classic matches or perceived classic matches and give you their fucking psychological breakdown for it, I would have that shit scheduled and reminded and watched every time.
Bret Hart talking about that Ciampa Cole spot would probably be worth the price of admission, because I know he would. I mean, this is a guy who would sell his knee for like 50 minutes in a. Just for, I mean, he would literally go, like, what pay-per-view was it? I think it was the First in Your House when he injured his knee in the opener, and he was still selling it an hour and a half later in another match where he's wrestling Jerry Lawler of all people.
Yeah.
Can you imagine someone doing that today?
Oh, it'd be amazing. It happens occasionally, but just not enough.
Okay.
It's a rarity, unfortunately. But yeah, I would definitely, that would be on my watch list if these dudes were breaking down matches like that on the regular. I would totally be in on that. But yeah, it's really enjoyable. Like I said, for me, starts a little slow because of the Montreal thing, because I don't need to go through it again. Like Jerome said, he doesn't need to hear about it either. Once you really get past that, and again, it's not like it's bad, because Bret tells a good story, and, you know, whatever. But once you really get into their stuff, like I said, that is the thing. Just listening to two guys that have a legit respect and admiration for each other as gentlemen, as wrestlers, as people, talking about how much they respect their matches together, and Steve Austin repeatedly talking about how, you know, when Bret decided to do the comeback thing after the Iron Man match and picked him to work with, you know, he's like, you didn't have to pick me, you helped make me. He's like, I've never forgotten that. And he's like, you know, we had these great matches and everything, but he's like, I don't really get to where I'm at without having those great matches because I didn't know a Bret Hart was going to work with me. So it's really cool to see that, like, admiration and respect to have for each other. And it's a really fun watch. I think it's about like an hour and 10 minutes maybe. It doesn't go too long. It's really enjoyable though. Definitely a thumbs up watch on the WWE Network for me.
Yep, and another reason to respect Steve Austin is he has not taken any dirty Saudi money.
Yes, he isn't and hasn't and hopefully will never.
I mean, it's amazing that Shawn Michaels came back. And boy, what a match that was. And all these people have come back, and they've all taken the money, and Steve Austin's just like, nope.
Yes, and I hope it stays that way. I don't need to...
He does not need to ever wrestle again. I love the fact that he just had his last match in, what is it, March of 2003? Nobody actually knew it was his last match, and he just hasn't wrestled since. Because nobody ever stays retired in wrestling, and Steve Austin would probably be the first person to ever actually stay retired.
Yes, that would be very nice if it happened. But again, very enjoyable. And again, both of these shows are really good for various different reasons. They also have very different tones. So if you're looking for something happy and lighthearted, watch Steve Austin's Broken Skull Sessions with Bret Hart. If you really want to get into that Chris Benoit thing, like I said, you have to be emotionally prepared for it.
And in these times you might not be, so you might want to wait.
Yeah, because again, it is just an emotionally draining fucking journey. It's extremely well done, but especially if you were a fan at that time, if you were big into Eddie and Chris, it's gonna take it out of you. But again, like Jerome and I have said, it's probably the best thing Dark Side of the Ring has done so far. And I mean, I hope the rest of this season can really deliver on some of that quality.
Yeah, I would definitely like to come back and talk about some of these other episodes as well. Because, we got Dino Bravo, Owen Hart. What else? What other...
They're doing the Brawl for All. They're doing the New Jack Mass Transit incident, which is next week.
Oh my goodness. We have to come back and talk about the New Jack Mass Transit incident.
We can definitely do that.
It's awful. I don't know why I'm smiling, because it's really awful, but I don't know, there's just something about the incident it's almost comical if it wasn't tragic.
I wonder how much censoring they're going to have to do for New Jack, because if you've ever heard this Brother Shoot interviews, every other word is a racial thing, and you know what I mean? Fuck, shit, goddamn, son of... I mean, I don't know how much actual New Jack footage will make this documentary.
It's only acceptable if they just play New Jack's theme throughout the whole thing, so you really capture the experience of a New Jack match.
You know what they could do?
Which is...
Hang on, that's a great idea. I'm going to expound on it. They could play New Jack's music, and they could have the B-roll footage of him talking with no sound, with it being closed captioned and censored.
I think it's such a weird thing to try to explain, because I'm assuming that most wrestling fans have never actually watched an authentic New Jack. They haven't had the authentic New Jack experience, because I don't think WWE is paying for that song.
No.
But New Jack was terrible. But when he came out, he literally wrestled his quote unquote wrestled his matches while is it Gangsters in Paradise, or
I don't remember exactly what it was, but whatever it was, yeah, his theme music played throughout the entire thing, which would include him brutalizing people with weapons. My favorite thing is he'd break out a fucking a guitar and randomly start dancing and then hit somebody with it. He'd break out a computer
before
key.
Jeff Jarrett ruined it
for
everyone.
But I mean, yeah, it's just the New Jack thing was the greatest thing Paul Heyman ever did was accentuate somebody's positives and hide all their negatives. New Jack was a shitty fucking professional wrestler that could take punishment, could hit people with shit, and jump off of things. So what did Paul Heyman do? He played his cool-ass theme music throughout his entire wrestling match. New Jack beat the shit out of somebody with weapons. He took some punishment. He made a comeback, and then he jumped off of something high and made everybody happy.
And he definitely had a very specific aura surrounding him that very few people have. Even if you have an aura, even if you're a bad wrestler, that makes a huge difference. Because, you look at a Super Dragon, a Nick Gage, these are not great wrestlers, but they have an aura to them that you can't teach that, you can't capture that. And I think that's something that New Jack also had.
Well, to stay in ECW, look at the fucking Sandman. The Sandman on his best day could be okay occasionally. But obviously the best thing about the Sandman was two things. The entrance of Enter Sandman, which everybody fucking loved, and then he swung a cane and drank beer while smoking a cigarette and beat the shit out of people. And that was over in the fucking 90s, brother, let me tell you.
I mean, it was over at One Night Stand 2005
Yes.
when literally they sang the whole song they sang it for like 3 minutes.
Exactly. Like I remember I was every once in a while my older daughter would ask me about like entrances or really cool things, and like I love her. You can tell she's my daughter. One of her favorite entrances is the Minoru Suzuki one from, I think it's Wrestle Kingdom 9, when the chick sings Kazunore for him, and it's just like the best fucking entrance. And like I love that song, and she thinks it's cool as hell. And then like I found the undubbed version, because I have One Night Stand. I probably have it on fucking VHS somewhere. But I found the undubbed entrance of the Sandman from that One Night Stand. I was like, remember me telling you about the Sandman? She's like, yeah. I'm like, well, this was like, so I showed her that entrance. She's like, that dude's like a fucking superstar. She's like, how good was he? I'm like, oh, he fucking sucks. I'm like, but like that.
And the match, if you watch that match, it's terrible, but,
yeah.
But it doesn't matter.
I was like, yeah. I'm like, he's fucking horrible, Hannah. I said, but the thing is like everybody thought he was a star because of that entrance and because he drank beer and he smoked a cigarette and he swung a cane and beat the shit out of people and he looked cool.
Yeah. He had some bad 20-minute matches with Sabu that we should never speak of again, but...
Oh, dude, don't remind me of Sabu. I just had to fucking review a Sabu match on Impact this past week.
I can't believe that Sabu is still wrestling. I can't believe it.
I'm still waiting for him to hit Air Sabu one day in the corner and just turn to dust.
It's so depressing. Because Sabu was, like, the guy.
Dude, in the early 90s, there were people making arguments for Sabu as Wrestler of the Year. Because...
And it's 2020 and he's still wrestling.
Yeah, but like as you said, he had that aura which you can't teach. He had that it factor. And he was just doing shit that nobody else was doing. And
we honestly somebody just needs to pay him $100,000 in perpetuity for the rest of his life and just tell him to stop wrestling.
That would be fantastic. Because I really don't want to watch any more Sabu matches.
Yeah. Just give him $100,000 every year, buy him a house, and that's it. He's done.
But yeah, Jerome, I want to thank you for coming on. This was a good idea you had. I'm glad you wanted to cover this. I thought it was fun to talk about. I mean, not fun to talk about everything, obviously, but I mean, it was fun to get to talk with you and to kind of dive into that Benoit deal. Again, the Steve Austin stuff, it's kind of hard to get really deep into it. It's just a really good interview, as we said, between two guys that kind of love, admire, and respect each other for various reasons. And it's a good conversation. And like I said, the meat of it is when they really start talking about like that Mania 13 match. And I would pay for an extra tier on the network to get that regularly.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get that extra tier, unfortunately, because... Yeah, I really want to make a Chikara joke, but I think it would be bad form. But I don't know if we're ever going to see a higher tier, Larry, because WWE's having financial problems, and who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, so I guess that's going to wrap us up for today, Jerome. I will definitely have you back. We'll have to talk about New Jack and like Owen Hart and Dino Bravo and some things, and
the Brawl for All episode is probably going to be the funniest.
Yeah.
Even though there's a career-ending injury in there, I still feel like it's going to be the funniest.
At the very least, it'll be a fun, lighthearted episode, probably, about how bad it was. And
I mean, Butterbean knocking Bart Gunn out is still one of the funniest things that I've ever seen.
I know. Just the fact that...
I was 14 years old, and I was laughing my ass off when Butterbean knocked Bart Gunn out. Just
the fact that WWE legit thought that Bart Gunn could win that because Butterbean was a giant fat man. Like, that's all they saw him as, was a giant fat man. And technically, yes, Butterbean was a giant fat man. But he was a giant fat man that was knocking fuckers out all the time.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't an endurance test. Like, I'm sure if you put, like, a good boxer in there, he would have taken him out, but not Bart Gunn. It's also like Gorilla Monsoon's last public appearance in WWE as well. So that's also, like, a really sad kind of side aspect to it. But,
it is.
Oh, my goodness.
So, yeah, everybody, Jerome will be back. That is going to wrap us up. All right, we are back with another retro review. Joining me today, Steve Cook. Steve, how are you, sir?
Oh, hey, doing just fine. Fine and dandy, I guess we could say.
That's right. Steve, we've been mixing it up. We've been venturing into some different things for the retro reviews, and we're actually going to stick with a little TNA because we've done some of that recently. We are going to go back to the beginning. The very first pay-per-view, and to give some background, again, a lot of people might not know what happened. It's, 2001, Steve, WCW, and then ECW died. We were left with WWE. Later on, we would have like Ring of Honor, PWG pop up. But one of the other promotions that popped up was Total Nonstop Action, affiliated with the National Wrestling Alliance, better known as NWA-TNA, which was formed when Jerry Jarrett, his son Jeff, and Bob Ryder were on a fishing trip. All, Ryder and Jeff Jarrett were done with WCW. They were talking about the void in the wrestling industry, and Jerry Jarrett, if you guys know your history, very famous promoter in the Memphis area. And the family had been in wrestling for a long time, and they decided to make a go of it. They were going to do a new wrestling company, and they couldn't score a TV deal because nobody wanted to get in on TV after WCW and ECW were dead. And
WWF can't get a TV deal for WCW. They can get TNN to air WCW.
Yeah. And this was also at a time where, WWE, WWF was not at their highest profile despite winning the war. They did not have the best TV deal either at the time, because this was a time when they had the TV deal where they got rights but no advertising split. So, which was very different from them in the past. The rights were good, but it wasn't a great TV deal. Definitely not billion-dollar TV deals like they're getting today. It was a very different landscape back then. It was hard to get TV. But the pay-per-view providers were still interested in airing pay-per-view. They were still interested in wrestling. There was a big void with WCW and ECW gone. So the NWA-TNA promotion lands on weekly pay-per-view. And it was at the cost of basically $10 a week. With the idea that, well, if you spend $40 for one WWE pay-per-view that's like 3 hours, you can spend that same $40 and instead get 8 hours of our show. That
makes sense.
That was kind of their game plan going into this. And, I mean, in theory, not the worst idea. They partnered with Health South, which were their financial backers. Health South didn't last long. The debut show was in June, and by August, Health South was gone. There was financial issues within Health South, and the other problem was that NWA-TNA had overspent on their budget because the man they had hired to do the pay-per-view stuff was telling them that the pay-per-view estimates were about 10 times larger than they actually were. So Jeff and Jerry were like, well, shit, we got some money to spend. So they try to bring in more names and stuff like that. And then 3 to 4 weeks in, they're told, whoa, hang on, the buys aren't nearly that high.
You could tell also when you're watching when they figured out, we're not getting as much money as we thought, because like the set and stuff, it went downhill pretty quick.
Yeah, so NWA-TNA Wrestling debuted June 19th, 2002, Huntsville, Alabama, from the Von Braun Civic Center. Steve, no attendance listed on the cage match. And
it looked like a decent crowd.
Yeah, it did look like a decent crowd, but so I don't know.
I don't know if they paid or not. No idea.
No idea. I'd like to know, I mean, even if it was papered, how many were in there, but it looked good on pay-per-view, and it was the, they ran the big arena early, and then they ended up transitioning to the Asylum in Nashville.
The Fairgrounds, yes. The illustrious wrestling venue in Nashville. Still there to this day. There's all kinds of... Of course, there's all stuff of controversy going on there, too. Don't get me started on Nashville local politics between soccer and NASCAR and all kinds of stuff going on there.
Impact actually ran a pay-per-view last January from there.
Yeah, the building's still there. There was a couple times over the past few years, remember, where I think they've run a couple last shows, with quotation marks around, at the fairgrounds when they thought it was going to close down, or if they're just trying to get a house or something.
That's right. So we opened up the show, we got our pyro, and of note, what should be noted is during the pyro opening, they were fixing the wrestling ring. Why were they fixing the wrestling ring? Because during a dark match, there is a over 400-pound gentleman named Cheeks wrestling. And let's just say Cheeks rattled the ring and broke it, which led to people scrambling, the Harris brothers crawling around under the ring, fixing this fucking ring because they're going on the air. It's pay-per-view satellite.
That was a brilliant idea, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
Just a wonderful idea, dragging out the 400-pound guy to... I guess they really wanted to test out the ring and made sure it worked, right?
Yeah, and it didn't. They had to fix it.
No, it didn't. Not at all.
So, we got that, and the entrance, again, that looked pretty good, had the four big kind of white screens. Good pyro, nice stage. Jeremy Borash, a voice of WCW, welcomes us to the show, and he would obviously have a long career in the company until he signed with WWE. Yeah. He announces our hosts and announcers are Don West,
yes,
former TV writer / WWE / WCW writer Ed Ferrara and his dreadlocks.
Some interesting fashion choices between Ferrara and between Mr. Hawaiian Shirt Don West as well.
Yeah, and Ferrara has obviously had to make a TNA joke right out of the gate.
Well, of course.
And then the voice of sanity arrived, Mike Tenay.
Dressed in his tuxedo as he would be for the next 10 years.
Yes, Mike Tenay talked about how the evening is going to revolve around histories, legends, and attendance. History will be made by the crowning of a new NWA heavyweight champion, which heading into the TNA era was held by Dan Severn. He was stripped by the National Wrestling Alliance, along with the tag champions, because they were going to be working with TNA, and Dan Severn didn't want to work with TNA.
Yeah, and let's be honest, as you know, as legendary as Dan Severn is as a cage fighter, and as long as he held the NWA title during the dark period, he would not have been a fit for anybody trying to run any kind of television as a champion.
Well, I mean, he was no Colorado kid, so.
He was no Colorado kid, but the man had the personality of this wall I'm looking at. Let's be honest.
This is true. So they're going to do a gauntlet for the gold tonight. The TNA / Impact gauntlet for the gold is basically this. It is Royal Rumble rolls, a new entrant every 1 or 2 minutes, however they decide. And then when you get down to 2 people, it becomes a regular wrestling match. Which I actually always liked when they did that.
Yeah, I had no problem with the match concept myself. Well, we'll get to some people who did have a problem with it.
So that led to the NWA Legends arrived. Tenay brought out Harley Race, Dory Funk Jr., Jackie Fargo, Bullet Bob Armstrong, Korska Joe, Sarah Lee, which, if you ever watched one of these old pay-per-views, was the ticket window woman who would beat the shit out of people with a broom. Bill Behrens, who was booking everybody at wrestling at the time. And
he had a lot of people on the contract.
That's right. And Ricky the Dragon Steamboat holding the prestigious NWA 10 pounds of gold.
He was carrying the championship. He was not the current champion.
That's right.
That might make things a little bit more interesting.
That's right. So they talked about the history of the NWA Championship. They brought out Ric Flair, obviously. 20 men were going to be in this gauntlet for the gold. And that brought out Jeff Jarrett.
Yeah. Coming out to the same music he would have for the next 15 years or so.
That's right.
He stayed steady with that. You got to give him credit.
He did, dude. I mean, much respect to Jeff.
Yeah.
One of the smartest men in wrestling. Look where he ended up.
Absolutely. No doubt about that. And can we comment about the Ricky Steamboat promo real quick?
Sure.
Which, unfortunately, was kind of just your kind of typical Ricky Steamboat promo.
Go ahead.
Not the. Let's be honest. Ricky was never exactly the best speaker of all time. So I'm not sure if they could have got somebody else to kind of at least give the speech.
Probably could have.
You know what I mean? Yeah, it wasn't really the most electrifying way to start a show. It certainly did not resemble total nonstop action, which I know we had a ring breaking and whatnot, but weren't they going to start show with this anyway? To be honest,
I think they were. Yes.
So I think that's just kind of,
little false advertising there.
Yeah, maybe just kind of making the story sound better,
So Jared says that this is the stupidest and worst idea he's ever heard of. Said it's going to make a joke out of the NWA Championship. Jackie Fargo yelled at him.
Fargo told him to kiss his ass.
That's right. And then Ken Shamrock ended up arriving. He agreed that the gauntlet sucks, but that Jarrett won't be whipping his ass tonight. Scott Hall then appeared in the crowd. Yeah. He also agreed that the Gauntlet fucking sucks.
It's always great when when you bring out your top stars to build up this match you have come up later in the show, and they all make sure to point out that the match idea sucks.
Yeah, so
I mean, maybe it's just me, but aren't you trying? If I was trying to book or write some kind of wrestling promotion, I don't think I'd have my people pointing out how much my match ideas suck.
Yeah, so he said it sucks, but it's going to happen anyway, so they need to stop whining about it, and they all have to worry about beating Scott Hall. So you have a segment with the Legends, which in theory isn't bad because you're playing off the NWA roots. And then you trot out who appear to be your first three big stars, Jeff Jarrett, Ken Shamrock, and Scott Hall. Which, it's like, okay, well, maybe we'll see some new guys later. But as you mentioned, Steve, the problem is they just fucking bury the entire gimmick.
Not very sensible. Not very sensible. But this is kind of a trend that would go on for a while. And we should also point out that Jackie Fargo, who apparently had his matchmaking power there as a legend, made sure that Jeff Jarrett was going to be number one in the Gauntlet.
That's right. So
that comes up a little bit later on.
We went backstage to a personal favorite of yours, Steve, and of course I'm talking about Psycho the Dwarf. Now, Goldilocks interviewing the midget wrestler Psycho the Dwarf.
I was going to say Goldilocks was a personal favorite of mine. I brought her up a few weeks ago when we were talking about the upcoming / already happened TNA show.
That's right. So he talked about that the midgets are the true stars in professional wrestling, and he heard that TNA had brought in Teo and Hollywood as well. And he all he wants is some midget blood. Jeff Jarrett walks by and he's all pissed off. By the way, because we're not going to review obviously all these weekly shows, but later on there is a segment where Psycho the Dwarf pulls a gun on Jeff Jarrett in this promotion.
Oh,
There's
wow.
also one of the midgets also jerks off in a trash can during one of these episodes.
I believe that is also public.
Yeah, but Psycho pulls a fucking a gun on Jarrett at one point. And then Jarrett obviously fights him off and survives. He gives him the stroke, and Ed Ferrara, who is completely amused with himself, is, Mike, he gave him a mini stroke! And Ed Ferrara was so amused with himself and nobody laughed.
Yeah, Ed had some lines on commentary. We'll get to one of his less memorable lines. Maybe more memorable / also not well-received lines a little bit later on the show.
Yes, well, I hope you remember, because I'm not exactly sure what you're
I remember it, yeah.
Our first match in NWA-TNA history was a six-man match featuring the stars of what was going to be the X Division. We had AJ Styles, you guys may know him, named Wrestler of the Decade recently, PW Insider, or not PW Insider, PWI. Low Key, still active to this day, great wrestler, problematic personality. Jerry Lynn, who a lot of people remember from ECW and does not get enough credit for helping with the early days of the X Division as a solidifying force.
Yeah, he was the established name in this match.
That's right, and they faced off with a team known as the Flying Elvises, which were Jimmy Yang, Jorge Estrada, and Sonny Siaki, the Siacalypse now.
That's right. Quite the trio indeed. Jorge, of course, was trained by Dusty Rhodes, as they mentioned on commentary, and I don't remember him doing anything after TNA. Siaki had to retire early. I believe he got injured, if I'm not mistaken.
I think he had a liver transplant or something, actually.
Yeah, he had something bad happened where he had to step aside. And Jimmy Yang had a long career, actually. He made it to WWE, and he was there for quite a while. He never quite got to the next level as far as, getting a push in WWE, but he was employed there for a long time.
All right, real quick. Jorge Estrada's last NWA-TNA appearance was in 2003. And
Sounds
looks
right.
like March of 2003. I have to adjust for the cage match European date setting. March 2003, where he beat Disgraceland. I have to... Luther Biggs was playing Disgraceland.
Yeah, less said about that, the better.
And then after that, he worked 7 matches for NWA Wildside, IWA Mid-South, and TCW. And most notable was losing the NWA North American Heavyweight Championship to Hot Stuff Hernandez.
Ah, yes.
But he was done in May of 2003, according to Cage Match. Actually, only worked 51 matches in his career.
Well, there you have it.
So this was, unfortunately, for the rest of the card, it was a short opener. It only went about 6.5 minutes. The Flying Elvises won. The good news was it was really good, and it did deliver on the total nonstop action, if you will. Very kind of spotty, early X Division, unrefined style, but I thought it was really good and fun.
It was a fun little match. You had guys kind of flying around, guys hitting their big spots. It was kind of symptomatic of what the X Division would become later on. And see, there's going to be a problem here that I have with this whole match, this whole setup, and I'll just dive into it right now. They mentioned during the match, of course, that on next week's episode 2, the X Division Championship would be decided in a 4-way match between Styles, Low Key, Jerry Lynn, and Psychosis. So you're just kind of sitting there, you think, okay, these guys will be in title match next week, so you probably think they're going to get to be put over to kind of build up, right? You would think so?
No,
possibly?
wrong! They're geeks! They lost!
Yeah, they all lost. Come see the losers next week battle for a championship. So,
and just to kind of jump ahead, Psychosis also loses later in the evening.
Yes, exactly. So, way to build that match for next week, let me tell you. Good gravy. And unfortunately, and I also think for historical references later on in life, like trivia questions at the wrestling bar, if you will, I think it would have been better for them to have their first winners of a match be AJ Styles, Low Key, and Jerry Lynn. Just saying.
Yeah, it would have made just more sense, period.
Yeah, but the Elvis guys, though, which I'm not hating the Elvis guys. I'm just not the right time for that.
Nope. So next up, we had midget action, Steve.
Oh, I thought you were going to mention next up how we had the TNA girls dancing.
Oh, we did have the TNA girls in the classic cages dancing. We did.
Yes, we did.
But we had a midget match between Hollywood and Teo.
Oh, boy.
Mike Tenay.
I'll tell you, the fans were into it. Yeah. I'll give them that.
And Mike Tenay on commentary brags about how TNA is going to showcase all kinds of wrestling, including the midgets. He was very proud of this.
How long did that last exactly?
This match went just under 3 minutes.
Well, I meant how long did their pushing midgets last?
They kind of did it on and off. Like, because every once in a while, like, you'd think they stop, and then they'd bring in, like, some minis from AAA for a show or two. And, yeah, it's just... It was nothing that lasted long. But this match lasted just under 3 minutes. Teo, ends up basically, he misses with a fucking senton, but pins Hollywood.
Well, Hollywood sold it anyway, God bless him.
Oh my god. So it was short and it was not good.
It was, but it is mercifully brief. Let's just put it that way. But midget wrestling is one of those things that if you're sitting here, you're watching on TV, if you paid $9.99 for this show, and you're watching a couple midgets go out, you're thinking, like, what the hell? But hey, if you're a family, you're sitting there live at the show, you bring out the midgets, you have some fun. So it's one of those things that works well for a live crowd and doesn't work well for people who aren't there.
That's right. And I will agree, because the crowd was into it. I can give them that. It's just, it wasn't good. And like you said, I mean, my man Hollywood sold that finish even though it completely missed.
You gotta give man credit, I guess, or something.
He was trying to help a brother out, I guess. So Ed Ferrara and Don West head to the ring. And Ed Ferrara is fucking giddy. Because he announces that they're going to do a lingerie battle royal next week. He is fucking so excited about this.
He was pretty excited about that, I'll tell you.
They brought out Francine, a lady named Joni, Shannon, which was Daphne, Alexis Lurie, better known as Mickey James, someone named Sasha. Don't know who the hell she was.
The former stars from the NCW, wherever the hell it
was. Someone named Aaron, Electra of ECW fame, Taylor Vaughn, and Dorisa Tyler. So all these lovely ladies came out, and Francine decided to run everybody down, said nobody can compete with her, and that she is the queen of extreme. Elektra questioned this, said this is a new company, and of course we got the cat fight. Ed Ferrara losing his shit, loving this. Elektra's top gets ripped off. Dawn West has a huge grin on his face as he tries to cover her up. And Francine promises to be crowned the first ever Miss TNA next week.
There was a lot of stuff going on there. The jacket part entertained me because West and Ferrara get into the ring, and somebody hands them the jacket after they get into the ring. Which kind of a little bit foreshadowing, right? When they don't even bother to bring the jacket to the ring with them. Neither of them were wearing a jacket either, so I don't even know why they bothered with that whole thing. But they had to do the spots, and you have a lot of people here, most of whom I think they wallowed in obscurity before fading to complete oblivion. I think is what happened to most of these people. And you also had Elektra accusing Francine of bankrupting ECW.
This is true.
Which I'm not sure how she managed to do that.
So, yeah, pretty much the only one that went on to do anything of note here is Mickie James.
Yeah, and she kind of made sure to peace out and kind of wash her hands of all this and kind of stay in the background, which is probably for the best.
Yeah. Smart businesswoman back in the day already. So we had a backstage interview. Goldilocks is back to make Steve happy, and she was with a gentleman named Mortimer Plumtree, who was actually a great heel manager early on in the NWA-TNA run. And he had
Unfortunately, he had some clients.
He had horrible clients, and we were going to see them next, Steve, and I'm going to paint a picture for the fans here. This match featured Psychosis and James Storm teaming up, a very random tag team.
There's a team.
And they faced off with a team called the Johnsons, which were the Shane twins, a pair of gigantic, jacked-up powerlifters. Now, let me paint you this picture, Steve, and fans that may not have watched this. The Johnsons are they're like not super tall, but they're gigantic individuals. They were masked individuals. And not only were they masked, they were in skin-tight bodysuits. And not only were these skin-tight bodysuits skin-tight, they were flesh-toned. Do you see where I'm going here? It's a play on words. The Johnsons.
Richard.
You may as well, yes, Richard and Dick Johnson, or whatever the fuck they were. Richard and Rod, is that what it was?
Yeah, Richard and Rod.
Yeah, that's right. Richard and Rod Johnson, the fucking dicks. That's what you're getting. Two giant dicks in this ring.
And you wonder how the company didn't just get out of business like right then and there.
So they
like just at that moment, right when the two giant dicks walked out, you wonder why everybody just didn't turn it off right then and there. Because, good God, just, I mean, as much crap as we give some of these companies for some of the stuff they trot out on television these days, have we seen anything as bad as Richard and Rod Johnson on pro wrestling television in the past? God, how many years?
Well, depending on who you want to listen to, Joey Ryan.
Okay, well, I mean, that's not great, but at least he's not wearing a flesh-colored bodysuit and a flesh-colored mask.
He makes people touch his dick, though, so, I mean...
Well, he does, but he doesn't work anywhere big other than Impact. So, and you got these guys. It's just awful, and they're facing Psychosis and James Storm, who I assume they were picked out of a hat in the Lethal Lottery backstage. Is that what happened there?
I believe so.
Like these guys have a lot in common. Let me tell you, James Storm looking like fresh out of high school at that point.
Pure babyface James Storm, no facial hair, little baby fat still on him. He was a youngster back then.
It's a little surprising when you see this, and you've seen James Storm over the past several years, and yeah, he's changed, folks. He's still a cowboy, but he's changed in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and okay, so this show took place like 19 years ago, right? So
2002.
That would have made him like 23, because he's 42.
Well, I mean, he got booked for the show because I remember they're practicing stuff on a Nashville local show or whatnot, and I want to say Storm was wrestling Chris Harris.
Yeah,
that sounds right. That sounds right to me. I don't know if there's a one-on-one match or if they're both in the match or they were both in the ring. I'll tell you that. And the people were watching, and the TNA higher-ups were like, all right, these kids are good. Let's bring them in. And Harrison Storm had jobs for a long time afterwards.
That's right. So this match, the Johnsons win. It's no good. James Storm and Psychosis try a lot, but
they try.
The worst part is this match basically featured a guy, as Ed Ferrara kept saying numerous times, being pounded by a Johnson.
Don West was all about Don West about Mortimer Plumtree was just giving it to the Johnsons on the outside too.
Yes.
Mortimer was not happy, and we also had an appearance during this match by a lady by the name of Alicia, who you might remember Ryan Shamrock back in the day. You might remember something back in the day, and here she is as Alicia, and she stands outside for most of the match, kind of staring at the referee. Referee, by the way, Slick Johnson, who we assume is not a member of the Johnson family, at least not these Johnsons, not that family, I don't think.
He was the littlest Johnson in that family, but
he was the littlest Johnson. There you go. But there was something going on with him and Alicia, though, because after the match, Slick leaves the ring, and Alicia gets up in his business, and Johnson hands out a wad of cash to Alicia. And not sure what that wad of cash was for.
My first guess was, is she a prostitute?
Didn't that end up being the angle?
I don't remember, to be honest with you, dude, but yeah.
I want to say she came out for Borash next week or something like that.
So we went back to Goldilocks, Steve, and she was with a tag team called The Dups.
Bo and Stan.
Bo Dup and Stand Up. Bo Dup was Otto Schwanz, and Stand Up was none other than Trevor Murdoch.
Oh, there you go.
And there was also Fluffed Up, their lovely, I guess, female cousin they were supposed to be fucking.
I looked her up, and she didn't do anything afterwards.
No, she was also known as Heaven Sent and Seven on the independent scene.
Yeah.
So they get an interview from them. They're drinking beer. Bill Behrens arrives and stops them.
Schlitz, let's point out. Schlitz beer.
Schlitz, oh Christ.
I don't know where they found that at.
Probably bought it off eBay, man. I mean, you can get anything on eBay.
Guess.
But Bill Behrens told him to stop drinking because he did not want intoxicated wrestlers on this show. Which
they should just point out that Scott Hall's in main event, right?
Which I don't know if it could have made the show really worse. And then in the ring, Jeremy Borash.
Wait a minute, hold on. We forgot the immortal line from Stand Up here, Mr. Trevor Murdoch. Hey, Bo, whoever heard of getting drunk on beer?
That's right.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
So we go back to Jeremy Borash in the ring. He announces NASCAR drivers Herbie Sadler and Sterling Martin to the ring.
Sterling Marlin, yes, the current NASCAR Winston Cup points leader, which, spoiler alert, Sterling Marlin did not become the 2002 Winston Cup champion.
God damn it.
I know, right?
So
he's a great interview, too, as we found out.
The crowd was really into these guys because it's Alabama and it's NASCAR.
It's Alabama, man.
So, I mean, smart call, and this led to K Crush arriving, better known as Ron Killings to many. And he makes fun of these drivers, explains that my kind are athletes. We throw basketballs, we throw touchdowns, we run for touchdowns, and we hit arm drops, and you two guys aren't athletes. And this was the early edgy Ron Killings character. Very jaded and upset. He even talks about in his WWE 24 documentary, which is really good actually, how he was just really jaded and upset after his WWE release, and Jerry Jarrett just told him to go out there and say what's on your mind. And
he talked about his kind and our kind. He went out there and he did it. And then Herbie Sadler took a microphone and no.
Yeah, he said, how can anybody expect to take you seriously by the way you're dressed? He said there's a lot of NASCAR fans here, and Mike Tenay, in the whitest way possible, testify, brother!
Which made me wonder how many NASCAR races Mike Tenay has watched in his life. I'm just saying.
I just like Tenay pretended he was like in a Pentecostal church.
He kind of caught up on the subtle. He got some of that subtle racism. He starts yelling "testify." I'm not sure what to take away from that. To be honest with you.
So this all led to Brian Christopher, God rest his soul, running down the ramp and attacking K Crush. Sterling and Sadler sent K Crush out of the ring. Brian Christopher grabs the mic, calls him a mofo, Why doesn't your kind come down and pick on my kind right now and challenges K-Crush to a match next week?
Well, there you go. It's
What exactly was... Like, I'm not trying to be disrespectful of the dearly departed and all, but was Brian Christopher's kind my kind versus a druggie versus a drug dealer?
Not quite sure. Not quite sure about all of that. He had Ed Ferrara continually calling him Brian Lawler, which I'm not quite sure what that is all about.
Well, I'm pretty sure
he was Brian
they
Lawler.
Wanted everybody to make sure everybody knew.
That wasn't the name he's going by at that point. That's all I'm saying. That came along a little bit later, actually. But in any event, this was an angle, and it got really over with that crowd. It was a smart thing to book that in Huntsville, Alabama, because especially back in the early 2000s, NASCAR was so huge down in the South. Oh, it was, it was untouchable at that point. It was bigger.
Dude, trust me, I know, because when I moved down here, that was shortly after I moved down here is when Dale Earnhardt died. And they fucking closed the state down, brother. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the NASCAR is the thing in the South. So it's smart to get Hermie and Sterling on the show. And Hermie went on to have a relationship with TNA that extended beyond this to the point where he was running... you'll remember he was running those UWF shows.
They were basically TNA house.
Virginia, North Carolina area.
Yeah, because at the time they weren't running house shows and live events, so he started running those shows. I went to a few of those shows. I own actually most of those on DVD somewhere, actually.
Yeah, and that was, Hermie Sadler ran that show for them. That's kind of where this relationship started.
He also, I believe, wrestled K-Crush on one of these pay-per-views.
I recall him having a match of some sort. I don't recall Sterling Marlin ever coming back for a match or anything like that.
But I believe
I think he probably came back for a second show, and that was it.
I believe Hermie, though, faced K-Crush at one point. So, but yeah, and then we went backstage, and Jeff Jarrett was choking the life out of Jackie Fargo.
Yeah, which is understandable. I mean... The man did book and be number one in that Gauntlet for the Gold thing, which, and unfortunately, I don't think they ever had the Jeff Jarrett versus Jackie Fargo match.
So we had...
But you know what? If this is WWE in 2020...
Jackie Fargo strap him up.
World title contender. Jackie Fargo would be challenging for Universal title.
Right. So we go back to the ring and we have Stand Up and Bowed Up and announced as their cousin and girlfriend Fluffed Up. Facing off with Christian York and Joey Matthews of ECW fame.
Yeah.
Not a bad idea to bring those guys in because they were still, a decent tag team at that point. Little name value from ECW could work. Unfortunately, they had a really bad fucking match.
They didn't look good here. No, nobody really looked good here, to be honest with you. These two teams were not exactly on the same page. And I don't think that Matthews and York lasted too long as a tag team after this. I want to say that York pretty much disappeared, pretty much. He kind of fell off the face of the earth. And, of course, Joey Matthews went on to do a number of things, of course, with World Wrestling Entertainment, and then moved on to Ring of Honor, and then went back to WWE, and went back to Ring of Honor, and he's still bouncing around, and he's still a guy that you probably shouldn't be trusted. You probably shouldn't trust him, let's be honest.
Yeah.
He's one of those guys we're talking about the other day on the podcast. One of those shady con men you find wrestling once in a while. It's like, wow.
Christian York appeared several years ago in Impact, and he had I believe he had a pay-per-view match with Rob Van Dam. And he was still he worked some matches in 2018.
Did he come in for the gut check, or am I thinking of somebody else?
He might have, actually. I'm trying to find... I'm looking through here. He worked 2015... let me go back here. Yeah, he worked, in 2013, he did some TNA. And then, 2013... And then he was working, some MCW in Joppa, Maryland. He did some Omega stuff when they were doing that. PCW, BTW. He worked pretty steadily, actually, through 2015. Then took a 3-year off break and wrestled 3 matches in 2018, and then that was it.
I assume he probably has something else going on in his life where wrestling is probably kind of a part-time kind of thing he can do whenever he has a chance to do.
So
would be what I'd figure on that. But yeah, York and Matthews were a solid team back in the early 2000s, and Yeah, they didn't really go much of anywhere. And we mentioned Joey Matthews / Mercury's career, where, yeah, he's been everywhere, he's done everything, and you probably shouldn't lend him any money.
Yeah, and like I said, unfortunately, it's a bad match. See, they're not on the same page. Trevor Murdoch wasn't a really good worker back at that point yet, and Otto Schwanz was just.
Oh, he would have been fresh out of Harley school at this point, right?
Pretty much, yeah. So, I mean, and then, like, stand-up, Otto Schwanz, like, wasn't really that good either.
You gotta tell me about it. Otto Schwanz is a name that, I'll be honest, that one doesn't ring a bell for me.
Yeah.
Where was he at?
I don't know.
Somewhere.
But it's just, like, it's not a bad match. And I think the worst part about it was, like, I think that they thought since we're running in the South, this gimmick will get over. And, like...
And then later on, you had the Dup Cup,
That's right, you had the Dup Cup. Christ, yeah, Otto Schwanz was still... He fucking worked some 2019 matches.
Well, why not?
See, 2019...
Somebody's got to.
He was working...
Is he still working? He's still working his Bear Dup? Or?
No, but he's fucking... Because he was working, like, CWF Mid-Atlantic and shit. He was working, like, actually really steadily through... Christ, man, let me fucking... I'm pulling this shit up. Everything through, like, 2014... He was working really steady. 2014 to 2019. He worked a little bit in 2013, 2012. He slowed down in those years. 2011 and 2010, he was slowing down a little bit too. Yeah, he slowed down a little in those years, but he was working a good clip though. I mean, kind of, which like according to Cage Match, like he worked in like 2000. At like WWE dark matches and stuff, and then he worked obviously the TNA stuff. And I'm trying to pull all this up here, man. He had WWF shit, and yeah, he had a bunch of like WWF dark matches. And that was in 2001. Then in 2002, he started working with TNA, and that didn't last long. Apparently he worked like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 matches.
I remember it lasted long enough for the Dup Cup. I remember that.
His last match was a loss to Teo the Dwarf in the Dup Cup Invitational.
Oh, I'm sure that sold out.
Monitor backstage sellout, Steve.
Absolutely.
But he took time off for a while and then like worked a pretty decent schedule. I was surprised to see that.
Well, good for him. At least he's keeping steady. He's getting some work done, and I guess I don't suppose they brought the Dups in for the TNA reunion.
I don't think so. So
I don't know, but we're talking about the South here a lot here, and coming up next we have a lot more of the South.
Toby Keith arrives.
Yeah.
Toby Keith, friend of Jeff Jarrett. Long time it was rumored that he and Jarrett were trying to fully buy TNA / Impact Wrestling because they had feelers out for a TV deal, but he was their idea of getting a big star on the show. And it wasn't, again...
And at the time, he was quite over as a musician at this particular time.
No, and I'm not denying that, but it was a good idea is what I'm saying. He did a little performance of Red, White, and Blue, I believed, which was...
The Angry American / Red, White, and Blue, whatever it is. Yeah, it was big at that time.
And he was cut off by Jeff Jarrett, who interrupted him to go to the ring for the Gauntlet for the Gold match.
The fans were pissed, too.
They fucking hated him.
But, I mean, to be fair to Jarrett, I mean, they probably needed to get the match started to make sure they made the 2-hour time.
So this match features, and we're going to go in order of appearance, Steve. We have Jeff Jarrett, Buff Bagwell, Lash LaRue, Norman Smiley,
yes,
Apollo, who was a big dude from Puerto Rico who they tried to push at various points, K-Crush, Slash from the New Church, who we loved,
yes,
Del Rios, who was better known as Spellbinder back in the day.
Which, I mean, by better known is kind of relative, I suppose.
Well, I don't think anybody ever knew him as Del Rios.
Yeah, people barely knew him, let's be honest.
Justice was out, who was an unmasked Abyss.
Yes, sir. Unmasked Abyss.
From Puerto Rico.
Former Wildside champion as well.
That's right. Conan.
Also from the Northern Kentucky area, but we might get that a little bit later.
This is true. Conan was in next. followed by, of all people, Joel Gertner. well, Steve.
Joel was not the man in the match.
That's
however.
right.
In fact, he was talking about the Rainbow Express, and as we discussed on the last time we did one of these,
you were correct.
I was pretty sure that Bruce was in fact Angry Alan Funk / Wee Wee.
And again, you were correct. My apologies for that. Good job.
Your apologies to Lodi. We don't mean to insult Lodi by associating him with this nonsense.
Rick Steiner was number 12.
Yeah.
Number 13 was It's the Wall, Brother, Malice. Let's see here. Number 14 is Scott Hall, followed by Toby Keith.
Not official entry in the match, but he did come out at the buzzer, so it was a little bit confusing.
That's right. And he goes in and he does the suplex on Jeff Jarrett, which was TNA's first big star moment and got some airtime on the mainstream media.
Yeah.
And then he and Scott Hall eliminated Jeff Jarrett. So, let's see. The Vampire Warrior was in, who was the real number 15, which was Gangrel.
Yes.
And then we get Devin Storm.
Oh, he skipped over one. He skipped over the Wildcat.
I'm sorry, Chris Harris, then Devin Storm. Yeah, my bad. So yeah, you got Chris Harris there, obviously a future TNA Tag Team Champion and star. Guy they tried to push a few times. Unfortunately, left for WWE at one point. That went horribly wrong, and he came back. And
yes, it did.
Things were never the same. But
that's all we can say about that.
Devin Storm, though, was in, WCW, ECW alum. Then number 18 was the king of old school, Steve Corino, making a little cameo appearance.
Probably about 100 pounds lighter than any time I've seen him in the past 10 years.
Ken Shamrock was number 19, followed by Brian Christopher at number 20. They brawled around. The whole thing, this all lasted for about 31 minutes, leading to Malice and Ken Shamrock being left. It was kind of every okay-ish battle royal ever. Like, I didn't hate it. It wasn't necessarily good. You got some pops from the stars. You got your Toby Keith moment. It was okay.
Yeah, it was fine, I thought. Not terrible or nothing. Yeah, the Toby Keith stuff was good. I thought Toby Keith hit a nice suplex, too.
Hell of a suplex. Nice to lay on it.
Keith was a big dude. I mean, you could have had that guy, like, be in a match and it would have made some sense because he looked like a guy who could get in there and rough it up a little bit. I mean, some of these musicians, they don't exactly look the part, but Keith did look the part. Bagwell came in early. He didn't do a whole heck of a lot. Lash LaRue siding good gravy. Apollo had a nice run this thing because like you said, they tried to push him here and there, and I think they thought he was going to be a big deal. Never quite worked out. K-Crush didn't do a whole heck of a lot in this match. The one guy, I'll tell you, when I was watching this in 2002, younger, like I think 18-year-old me at this point was watching this, and I had been watching this show on public access a couple years prior, called the Northern Wrestling Federation, and NWF is still alive in Cincinnati to this day. I don't think they have the public access show anymore, but they kind of ran shows in a place in Erlanger, Peel's Palace, a couple places in Cincinnati, and they had tapings, and they had a wrestling show, and at that point, if there's wrestling on TV anywhere, I would find it and I would watch it because that's what I did. You know how it is being a wrestling fan. You just do that. Even if it's on a shitty public access channel, it looks like crap. Yeah, you're watching because why not? And sure enough, this guy Justice comes out, and I remembered him from the NWF as Prince Justice. This big old boy big black hair. He used to wear this shiny blue shirt and blue pants, and people used to call him Big Blueberry because he looked like a big blueberry. And he was a heck of a promo. He was a color commentator on that show. And sure enough, here's Justice popping up here. It's like cool. And then later on, years later, when he becomes Abyss and never talks, it's I was kind of surprised that's how it went for him. Because back in the day, he was like the one guy on that show that could actually talk.
Yeah, and obviously Abyss went on to have a really good TNA/Impact career. 2005, you can make an argument he was like the best big man in the business. His shit with AJ in 2005, that cage match they had, is excellent.
Yeah, and I think that's when he was also in the Embassy in the Ring of Honor at that point too. And I remember that trios tournament he had with where he's teaming with AJ with Alex Shelley and Jimmy Rave.
Yep.
That's pretty good stuff. And the best fit in, he fit right in Ring of Honor, which you wouldn't think would be the deal, but it kind of worked out for him during that time period.
That's right. Teaming with the crown jewel of the embassy, Steve.
That's right. And good old the baby bear, if you will.
That's right.
But,
and Jimmy Rave.
So we took that trip down memory road.
Speaking of Jimmy Rave, Jimmy Rave had a little run in TNA for a while, tagging with old Dallas, Lance Hoyt. Better known as Lance Archer, is the
old rock and rave infection.
Right.
With Christy Hemme. I remember the Christy Hemme part more to be honest.
Well, she was the best part of the act. That's why.
Absolutely, no doubt about that. But Malice / the Wall. You know, he had James Mitchell by his side. He's supposed to be one of the big stars here that they're building up, and I remember him having a bit of a run in TNA, like a little bit, but I don't think it quite panned out so much. And of course, he died not too long after that as well. So
yeah, I'm gonna pull up his see what we got here on
I remember he had a push there for a little bit. They're trying to push him as like the big guy. Remember I want to say he had a big match with Sabu that may have been
a ladder match
TNA
with
shows.
Sabu.
That's right. Yeah.
He worked NWA-TNA, and he lost a last man standing match to Don Harris. And that was his. Oh no, he did. I'm sorry, he did come back.
I remember Harris had a feud going to the New Church at some point.
He won a couple scrub matches later on in 2002, and then in 2002 he was working for WWA, which was another project Jeff Jarrett was involved with, which was promoting wrestling in like Australia, and Buff Bagwell and Sting and Nathan Jones and Lex Luger working on these shows. Yeah. He worked a bunch of tag matches on these WWA shows, and then he worked a couple XPW dates, and then he closed out his career working 79 All Japan Pro Wrestling dates.
All right.
From 2000, let's see, February 2003 through December 2003 was his run in All Japan.
Was that when they were pushing like all the American guys?
Yeah, and like Bernard.
Or they like Jamal and people like that?
So, yeah.
Rika, I think Rika was over there.
I believe so.
Was that when they had like the Monsters, where the fuck that faction was?
Yeah, they had that big faction over there. They had great theme music.
Yes. I forget what the
R-O-D.
Yeah. Is that right?
The Taka music with it.
Yes. Taka always an important part of any faction in Japan, pretty much. So. But we also had a Rick Steiner sighting, so that's nice to see. Of course, Scott would be the Steiner you associate more of TNA going forward, but Rick did appear here and there. And Chris Harris, by the way, was also on the NWF show I was talking about back in the day. There's Wildcat Chris Harris. So it's like, hey, there's that guy again. Cool. So those are the main things I remembered. And there's also a memorable spot, at least to me, where Apollo gets up on the top rope. He's waiting to hit somebody with something. He just kind of stands there for a while and never does anything to anybody. Yeah. I always love it when that happens.
He's just kind of perched up there waiting.
Eventually, he just kind of jumps off the rope. He like kind of just climbs down and just like clotheslines Malice or something.
Some say he's still waiting up there to this day, Steve.
That old video, I always love that kind of video game type spot, like Shawn Michaels did in '92 Rumble, where he's just standing on the turnbuckle waiting for somebody, and it never happens. You know, like in a video game.
So this led to the Ken Shamrock versus Malice finale, the singles match. They only went about 6 minutes, felt very rushed. It wasn't bad, but it felt rushed. I'd call it okay at best. Ken Shamrock becomes your first NWA-TNA World Heavyweight champion, and the whole gimmick was that they were hoping to get attention because Shamrock, obviously a UFC guy, former WWE guy, hoping to get some eyes on him, but Ken didn't exactly have a long run because he would eventually drop this belt about 2 months later to the Truth.
Yeah. Ron the Truth Killings. It was getting, K-Crush was getting that act over, and it was the right move to put on Truth at that point. This match was about what I expected from it, to be honest, with the people involved. You see Ken Shamrock, you see Malice. You don't see two top-notch workers there, to be honest with you.
Not a catch-as-catch fan classic, Steve?
No, it's about what I expected, especially since I'd been at Battle Royal there for a few minutes. So, Malice had been there for a lot longer, of course. Shamrock just came in, but let's be honest, Shamrock just coming in probably got blown up. And unfortunately for Ken Shamrock, he would be remembered to this day as one of the top UFC/MMA guys in history, if not for the last 10 years of his career or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, he just completely took his legacy and just pissed all over it, unfortunately.
So we had to end the show not with the champion standing tall, but with the biggest star in the company, Jeff Jarrett. Jeff Jarrett, good old Triple J. It is a Triple H phase during this time. Heads down the ramp. He's bitching about if any of the legends had actually...
Oh, we had a segment backstage before that, too, where they were him and Jackie Fargo and Toby Keith were going at just to make sure that, we got established before Jeff Jarrett came out.
So he came down and ran down to legends, tossed Bullet Bob over the old announce table. Jackie Fargo and Toby Keith came down with security. Fargo promised Jeff Jarrett will get his ass kicked next week. Scott Hall came out, brawled with Jarrett, and Ferrara gleefully announces Jeff Jarrett and Scott Hall for next week to close our show.
Yeah. And the line I mentioned earlier from Ed Ferrara, right after the match, where he talks about the wall, of course, he talks about Malice, he talks about Ken Shamrock, and he makes a wonderful joke about the Special Olympics in relation to it.
Oh, okay.
Where if you can challenge Ken Shamrock or Malice, and you might win, but that's like winning the special. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. I'm surprised he lasted. Ed didn't last too many shows after this anyway.
They got rid of him pretty.
He was
quick.
not around. He wasn't around for too long. I was surprised he's around for next week after that.
So, Steve, that kind of wraps up. That is the first NWA-TNA weekly pay-per-view. Again, this was back, if you're looking for a date, if you're to look at this on Impact Plus, it's June 19th, 2002. Overall thoughts and a score out of 10, Steve.
Oh, gosh. I wish I could give him a nice little score, but I feel like 5 might be a little generous, to be honest with you. And I'm kind of leaning to I'm thinking 5 because you had a couple of decent things on the show. You had I liked the opening 6-man with the Elvises and with Styles and Loki and Jerry Lynn. And I thought the Battle Royal had some good work, and there's some angles that made sense in the context and then got over live. And there were some good things here. And I feel like I'm probably being a little bit generous with the 5, but then there's some stuff that kind of makes you wonder, how did this show last another week?
And scarily enough, they did, I believe, 110 weekly pay-per-views.
It got better.
Yeah.
Well, some parts got better. Some parts got better, and some parts still kind of stayed shitty, but, there was some good stuff. We've talked about that before.
And I've talked about it before too. TNA was a big thing that helped me stay a wrestling fan back in the day when ECW and WCW went on, and it certainly wasn't because of this show. I agree with you. I really enjoyed the opening 6-man, even though it was short. But the thing is there's a lot of bad on this show. The midget match is bad. The Johnson's tag match is bad. The Dubs tag match is bad. On top of that, you have Psychosis, Lynn, Styles, and Low-Key all losing when they're fighting for a championship the next week. Just
not
horrible. Good. And then, the gauntlet and final match, which takes up about 40 minutes total, is okay.
Okay. And I thought Shamrock was a fine choice as champion.
Yeah, and he is. He's a fine choice. So... I'm kind of looking at this show, Steve, and I'm like, it's bad. And with that in mind, I'm going to have to go, 3. It's fucking bad, so I'm going to pull up here. I know there's a review. I know somebody did a video review of it on this site here. I'm going to pull that up. What did you give it?
I think I kind of thought 5, but I'm kind of thinking, honestly, maybe 4.5.
All right.
Because I'm not quite sure it's a 5. I think it's 4.5. Right.
Amazingly enough, Cage Match has this rated at 5.09, which absolutely shocks me.
Yeah.
And the 411 review, which was done there was a 2010 review done by Nick Bazaar back in the day. He went with a 4 on it.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, any way you slice it, it's not a good show.
No.
And like, the other thing, too, I know people hated about this first show, which was not even the Jeff Jarrett stuff. People, I remember at the time, hated the fucking Truth promo because of the racial overtones. They hated the dubs because it was stereotypical quote unquote redneck stuff. So I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, and definitely the Cake Rush and that stuff really ages bad too. Like, they all look like, I mean, especially like Sadler and Mike Tenay screaming, they all look like complete jackasses, let's be honest, right?
I guess, yeah.
they don't come off well in this during this particular segment, but we can kind of play it forward a few weeks where it does end up working out for K Crush / Ron the Truth Killings, where he gets over with this character. And he gets over eventually as a babyface with this character because the people are down with it. They're down with what he's doing, and he ends up becoming champion over it. So, in the end, it did work out for him, and obviously it worked out for him because the guy is still freaking wrestling today somehow. And he's like, what, 86 years old, something like that.
Sure.
He's up there. He's all right. So, it ended up working out for him, but I can understand why people were not down with it.
R-Truth was the only dude that could do the 10-year challenge and use the same photo twice.
Seriously. It's ridiculous. I mean, he doesn't look any different on the show than he does now.
No.
Let's be honest.
Dude is like 50 legit, and he is fucking in insane shape.
There might be an extra tattoo or two. I don't know. I wouldn't, maybe so. But, yeah, he looks the same now as he does back on the show.
It's
amazing. I'm
pulling it up real quick. I'm gonna just clarify his age because I want to make sure I don't want to besmirch him. Let's see here.
You don't want to say he's 86 years old?
Shit, no, I'm sorry. He's not 50 yet. He's 48, but he looks fucking phenomenal for 48.
Yeah, and we're going back to 2002, and he had a run in WWE before this.
I know.
So, it's amazing.
So, but that's gonna wrap that up, Steve. Again, it's unfortunately not a good show, but the good news is we did get a lot of good things out of TNA. I know me personally, I was introduced to a lot of new talent. Low key and AJ, more AJ Styles. Yes, he was in WCW at the end. That doesn't really count because he didn't do anything.
No, we can't count AJ Styles in WCW.
But I mean, I loved them. I love Jerry Lynn. Underrated stable early on, the Triple X stable with Low Key, Elix Skipper, and Christopher Daniels. Yeah. Little X gonna give it to you. Their feud with America's Most Wanted early on, obviously Team Canada. A lot of stuff that I loved coming out of TNA. Unfortunately, this first show fucking sucked.
Yeah, and you mentioned all the financial troubles they ran into, which was interesting because if you watch this first show booked in the big arena, it has a good crowd, got a nice looking set and whatnot, and it has the feel, it kind of looks like WCW towards the end. And you fast forward a few weeks, and we're in the Nashville Fairgrounds, and everything's really scaled back because they realized they weren't making that much money.
Yeah, and that, of course, led to an investment from Panda Energy, where they bought approximately 75% of the company and took control so it would not go under. And that led to drama throughout the years, rumors of shutdowns, loans, all that shit, and it didn't end well for that, but somehow Impact Wrestling's still around because
isn't it amazing?
They found somebody else to buy them, and Anthem bought them, and Anthem has deep pockets, and Anthem bought them a TV station.
Isn't it amazing how these things work?
It's crazy.
Could you have predicted that 18 years ago? Anything close to that?
No, but I always laugh at the old Jeff Jarrett interviews. They said we wouldn't last 6 weeks. Ha ha!
And then you watch the shows and you see why people wondered if they last 6 weeks.
Well, it's like, in theory, you almost didn't quite last 6 weeks because of the Hell South thing,
yeah.
But...
Yeah, and then you watch the shows and like, well, you probably shouldn't have lasted 6 weeks, let's be honest.
Yeah. My favorite old school TNA quotes are always Jeff Jarrett going, Jeff, a lot of people were doubting you. I tell you what, they said we wouldn't last 6 weeks. Ha ha! And the other one was AJ Styles. AJ, how do you differentiate TNA from the rest of the wrestling business? Well, we have 6 sides. Every fucking interview, both of them.
We had not had a 6-sided ring during this show, which probably would have made things more interesting.
No, that was the move to Fox Sports.
That was a move to Fox Sports, to Orlando, and to the Impact Zone.
That's right. So,
yes.
Steve, anything else on this show before we wrap up?
I think we kind of covered all of it. We covered the matches. We covered the TNA girls. We covered Goldilocks, which I don't know if we ever looked up what happened to poor old Goldilocks. I remembered her on the show. It's like, oh yes, good old Goldilocks, wonderful girl. Goldilocks is listening out there. Let us know what's up. But yeah, I mean, it's not a great show, but it's not a good show, but it is good memories. Wouldn't you agree? Good memories.
Okay, let me see. I'm pulling up her Wikipedia here, and Goldilocks, real name Moon Shadow.
Yeah.
Which hell of a name there.
I remember that.
Yeah. She was a musician. And
she probably should use Moon Shadow as a wrestling name.
That's right. So she had the professional wrestling career, and then since leaving TNA, the last update on here is she appeared on a number of television programs. In 2009, she appeared on the CMT show Running Wild with Ted Nugent. Following that, in 2014, she appeared on an episode of Extreme Cheapskates on TLC. Appearing with her band, she showcased the ways in which they save money on the road, as well as how she goes on about her crafting. She was also a video contributor to CBS's The Talk.
Well, there you have it.
So, but that's what happened to Goldilocks following her wrestling career. She had a little fun run there in TNA.
Yeah, and we mentioned Alex Shelley earlier on with Abyss as well. Yes, Alex was Goldie's baby bear, which led to some fun chants on ROH shows of Baby Bear, and the Alex Shelley and Abyss connection.
That's right. So that was fun, but that's gonna close us up, Steve. It's not a great show, but it's fun to look back and see where it was, how it started, how it got there even before the bell rang, and then. Despite the fact that it was bad, I mean, we talk about it. I mean, people always think we just shit on, but there was a lot of good in TNA over the years. Unfortunately, there was a lot of bad press to go with it. But, I mean, you look at AJ's run, you look at all the other names again that were introduced, and I enjoyed a lot of my time watching TNA. I wish they would have had more stability throughout the whole time is my thing.
And I'll give some credits to the bad stuff on this show. Whereas, we watch a lot of shows these days are just completely unmemorable. They're bad, but they're not that kind of bad that you remember. You know what I mean? Where it's just really just grotesquely awful, like Johnson's and whatnot. It's just kind of meh bad. You see a lot these days. But all this stuff stood out one way or another, for better or for worse. Like. There was nothing on the show that was just meh kind of there. No, it was either pretty solid or pretty shit.
So that wraps up our retro review of NWA-TNA pay-per-view number 1. This has been the 411 on Wrestling podcast. You can follow us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, YouTube, the 411mania.com website, and any major podcasting platform. Please make sure to subscribe to our show, share us around on social media, subscribe and give us a thumbs up on the old YouTube machine, and if you have time, leave us a 5-star review on the podcasting platform of your choosing. Happy wrestling, everybody.